Sometime later, Sonny was back in his luxurious cabin, sitting on the soft bed and staring at the wall with a distant look on his bestial face. After the dinner conversation and its many, many revelations, each more terrible than the other, he had told Noctis that he needed time to think before giving him an answer. Despite the fact that Sonny now held the keys to possessing 2 of Sun God's knives, the sorcerer had not pressed him at all, and agreed to wait with his usual carefree attitude. If there was one redeeming quality about the immortals, it was that they could be very patient. Now, the flying ship was moving, sailing across the skies on its way back to the sanctuary of Noctis. They would be arriving in a day or 2. By then, Sonny needed to know what he wanted to do and how. He had to find the others and conquer this cursed nightmare somehow. Help Noctis free Hope, or make sure that she stays imprisoned forever. A pale smile appeared on his face. Hope. How funny it was to learn that this whole realm had been driven mad by the subtle, irresistible, inescapable manipulation of the great and terrible demon of desire. Everyone here had become subjugated by her wondrous, harrowing powers, including himself. Back in the Dark City, at his lowest point, Sonny had given up all hope of ever returning to the real world. In fact, he had convinced himself that hope was the deadliest, most vile of poisons. It was only after he had clawed his way back from the brink of madness and out of the forgotten shore, returning alive to the waking world, that he understood the terrible and destructive harm of that misguided belief. Sonny had built a modest life for himself and found out that there were people who genuinely cared about him. And even more importantly, he discovered that there were people for whom he cared as well. He learned that hope was not something to fear, but instead, something to draw power from. Something so vital that without it, there was no way one could survive, and no real point in that survival either. So, learning that his mind was now literally being poisoned by hope was quite a massive, incredibly bitter irony. How fitting. He sighed, and then stared at his 4 calloused hands. The obsidian knife, the ivory knife, the glass knife, the wooden knife, and one more, which he knew nothing about. Could they really collect them all? Noctis, Solvane, the Sun Twins, the one in the north. Could they really survive them all? Whether he liked it or not, there was only one way he could find out. First things first, he was going to have to make his way to the Iron Hand Island and see if the others had left any clues to their whereabouts. Luckily, it was not that far from the sanctuary. Noctis had said that Sonny's new heart needed a week or 2 to settle, whatever that meant, so he wouldn't be able to go right away. But the goal was already in sight. After the cohort was reunited, they would have to make a decision about which side to support. The others. Sonny wondered where they were and how they were doing. Were they even still alive? Had their journey in the nightmare been as harrowing as his? Recalling his own struggles, he shivered. He'd barely survived this horrible ordeal. What were the chances that the rest of his cohort had all made it out unscathed? Still, if there were any people alive with the ability to make it this far, it was the group of people he'd come to consider allies. Yes, he was sure they'd be okay. Of course, was that just hope talking again? Sonny decided to think about something else. Instead, he focused on his trials so far, the nightmares he'd been trapped in. Most of them had now faded from his memory, their details dissipating until all that was left was one dark, chaotic mess of blurred images, pressing weight, and sharp emotions. but some were still clear and vivid in all their terrible splendor, especially the first ones he had lived through. He remembered them all. Being a father who watched the flames consume his son, wife, and unborn child. An old man who dragged his weak body across scorching ash as his whole world burned around him. An immortal warrior being endlessly tortured by his own brother. And a cunning shadow who had grown too tired and too indifferent to care about life. That last one was perhaps the most damning, not because it was especially torturous. On the contrary, the Shadow Lord had been content and at peace in his last moments, but because it showed Sonny the pain and sorrow of those who the heartless immortal had left behind. That understanding was only made worse by witnessing how the Shadow's beloved steed had ended up, lonesome, broken, and consumed by madness, guarding the empty castle that his master would never return to until his last pitiful breath. But that was the nature of life. As one went through it, they collected strings and tethers that connected them to others. Everyone's fates were intertwined, and everyone was tied down and bound by those numerous connections, some of them fleeting, some deep and precious. Sonny, too, was not untethered anymore, which meant that should he die or be destroyed, his would not be the only fate that was broken and damaged. Everyone connected to him would suffer too, and that, in a way, made him responsible not only for himself, but also for those whose lives he had made different. The weight of that unfamiliar responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. There he was, thinking about his friends again. Sonny sighed. Was there really such a thing as freedom? And if there was, would anyone really want to possess it? He closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by all these daunting thoughts. Even though he had forgotten most of the nightmares, they still changed him. He felt older, somehow, and, hopefully, wiser. More mature and tempered, but also more fragile. He spent some time in silence, listening to the hull of the flying ship creaking gently around him and his two hearts beating steadily in his chest. Then, Sonny breathed out and opened his eyes. There was not much time to spend on pondering and self-reflection. A nightmare was a place for action, not philosophy. The corner of his mouth curved upward. Fine, then let's get ready to act then. First, I should finally, check on all those rewards I received thanks to that damned horse. He surprised himself by not checking them earlier. Still, there had been a lot going on after that horrible, bloody battle. Now, though, he had no time to look. He peered at the rewards, and his eyes widened. There were a lot. Sonny got comfortable on his criminally soft bed, picked up a few succulent grapes from the tray placed on an intricate table near it, threw one in his mouth, and finally summoned the runes. Let's see. The first thing he glanced at was the shadow fragments counter. He vaguely remembered receiving what felt like much more than 6 after slaying the black steed, who had been an awakened terror. So, Sonny was hopeful to see a pleasant number. However, when he did see it, he almost choked on the grape juice to death.
What? What the spell? What?
He even rubbed his eyes, thinking that he was seeing things. But no, the counter was the same. Shadow fragments, 2,823 out of 3,000. Sonny stared at it in disbelief.
600. I received almost 600 fragments for killing that damned horse?
Absent-mindedly, he threw another grape into his mouth and proceeded to almost bite off one of his fingers from the sheer disorientation of it all.
How is this even possible?
He thought about it for a bit, stunned, and then tilted his head a little.
Could it be?
One of the advantages, but also inherent drawbacks of Sonny's aspect, was that it operated through shadow fragments instead of the usual soul ones. So, while Sonny didn't need to collect and absorb shards to grow stronger, he also could not use the shards of creatures that he had not personally slain for that purpose. The other detail was that, unlike all human awakened, he did not receive a portion of all the accumulated soul fragments after killing others of his own kind, and instead received just one or two, depending on their rank. Was that perhaps because the spell, or rather the world itself, did not consider him a human? He was a divine shadow, after all, and shadows recognized him as one of their own, so would it be safe to say that in this context, his own kind were actually not humans, but shadows instead? The Black Steed had been a shadow created by one of the Chain Lords, an awakened terror possessing 6 cores, and with 1,000 years of battles and bloodshed behind his shoulders to fill them to the brim with shadow fragments. Did Sonny receive a portion of the fragments accumulated by the Tenumbrious Courser throughout his long and grim life, as a normal awakened would after slaying another human? The math certainly supported that theory. Sonny's eyes ignited.
That's it.
Not only was he correct, he might have just stumbled on one of the most crucial secrets about his own aspect, power, and future. Even since finding out that his aspect allowed him to form and possess multiple cores, Sonny had been wary of the eventual toll that hunting down enough nightmare creatures to create a new one would exert. As a sleeper, or even an awakened, he was too small and vulnerable. Any powerful abomination would have been able to snuff him out of existence with no more than a glance. The higher he climbed on the path of ascension, the less of such existences there would be, and thus the higher his chances of survival were going to become. However, that also meant that there would be fewer creatures he would be able to hunt down to collect shadow fragments, since slaying those lower than him in rank did not give him any at all. But now that he knew how much he could gain from destroying true shadow creatures, perhaps there was still a way for him to grow stronger rapidly, even after becoming a master. In any case, his progress was already staggering. First, the 1,000 fragments he had earned in the blood-soaked arena of the Red Colosseum, and now, these hundreds he gained by slaying the Nightmare Steed. Neither of these feats had been easy. In fact, both rewards had cost him an unimaginable amount of pain, torment, and damage, both mental and physical. But the result almost made it seem as if it had all been worth it. Almost. At the start of the nightmare, the idea of gaining enough fragments to create a 4th core had seemed so distant and unreachable. But now, just a few months later, Sonny was already near the finish line. This fact was both exciting and incredible, even if its splendor was somewhat overshadowed by all the hideous scars he had received along the way.
No, stick to thinking about the bright side. It is still amazing. And I survived, did I not?
Both elated and reminded of the horrors he had been subjected to in the nightmare, Sonny stared at the unbelievable number for some time, then shifted his gaze elsewhere. The second reward he had received was also very welcomed, be it strangely unexpected. In fact, Sonny stumbled upon it almost by accident while seeking the runes describing his shadows. Before that, he had noticed that the runes of the mantle of the underworld seemed to shimmer a bit differently. Confused, he concentrated on them and shifted his gaze to the last string describing the enchantments of the onyx armor. The counter of victories tied to the Prince of the Underworld enchantment. Now it read,
Vanquished foes, 3,291 out of 6,000.
He blinked. Somehow, at some point, he had managed to raise the counter by almost 1,000 victories. He knew that the nightmare creatures and humans he had killed in the Red Colosseum had not counted toward the requirements of the strange enchantment for a simple reason. He had not been wearing the mantle of the underworld while fighting them. So where had the 1,000 vanquished foes come from? Sonny frowned. Come to think of it, I was wearing the armor while sleeping in the Boundary Fortress. Did it actually accept every battle I won in the nightmares as a true victory? That would be very strange, since the enemies he had defeated in the never-ending nightmares had been just phantasms, summoned by the Black Steed, and not real in any way. However, that would also make sense. After all, the mantle did not care about him actually killing the enemies. All it cared about was that he had overpowered and defeated the opponent. If so, did it really matter if the opponent was real or not? The duelists of the dreamscape had been considered sufficiently real, so why would the creatures populating the nightmares be different?
1,000 souls. Had I really killed that many?
Suddenly, Sonny felt cold and somber. How many nightmares exactly had he lived through during those several terrible hours? Full of dark wonder, he shook his head and looked away from the runes describing the onyx armor. He was already halfway to satiating its mysterious enchantment, which is already good enough. Finally, Sonny looked at the cluster that interested him the most. His shadows. A few runes shimmered beautifully in the darkness. They read,
Shadows, Marble Saint, Soul Serpent.
And then, a new one.
Nightmare.
Sonny remained motionless for a while, a pale smile appearing on his face. Beyond the window of his cabin, the sky was slowly turning black, the stars shining in its velvet surface as they welcomed the arrival of the newborn moon.
Nightmare. So that is your name.
What better name could there be for a shadow that moved through human dreams, turning them into visions of horror? He hesitated for a few moments, then looked away, turning to a different string of runes. There was another shadow of his that had changed. The Soul Serpent. Every time Sonny moved up a class, so did the serpent. And every time Sonny mastered a new step of Shadow Dance, the serpent ascended to a new rank. At least, that was how things were supposed to go.
Shadow, Soul Serpent. Shadow rank, Ascended. Shadow class, Demon. Shadow attributes, Shadow Guide, Soul Weapon, Soul Beast.
Sonny sighed.
Ascended.
Now that he had mastered the third step of the Shadow Dance, the serpent had, indeed, evolved as well. The tenumbrous creature was now an ascended demon, just like the saint. Both of them had left Sonny in the dust. While it hurt his pride a little that his shadows were more powerful than him, not to mention way cooler, according to some tasteless brats. Having two creatures of such formidable might under his command was going to be of tremendous help, without a doubt, especially considering the caliber of enemies he would most likely have to face during the rest of this trial. He glanced down at the intricate tattoo coiling around his arms and torso. It seemed larger. Sonny could already feel the rush of the essence through his body. Its rate of expenditure and speed of replenishment increased even further. Not only was the serpent going to be much more powerful in its soul beast form, but also, from now on, any soul weapon Sonny would want to use would be of the ascended rank as well. Basically, he now had a vast arsenal of ascended armaments to choose from.
Well, isn't that neat?
Sonny lingered for a few moments, then continued to read the runes. The serpent was not supposed to gain any new abilities from rising to a new rank, just like Saint had not. However, that legacy shadow of his was a bit strange. It had come into possession of the Soul Beast attribute and the Soul Reaver ability the last time he mastered a step of the Aspect legacy after all. Who knew? Maybe this time would be the same. And just as Sonny hoped, there was a new set of runes shining in the darkness.
Shadow abilities: Serpentine Steel, Soul Reaver, Grace of Shadows.
He frowned.
Grace of Shadows.
Sonny concentrated on the new ability and read.
Ability description: the master of the Soul Serpent can grace another with the trust and companionship of their shadow guide. One should be careful whom they bestow with their grace. Entrusting others with the loyalty of shadows is the same as sharing one's soul, and thus should not be offered lightly.
He tilted his head.
What?
So, basically, this ability allowed Sonny to transfer the ownership of the Soul Serpent to someone else, as if the shadow was just an echo. No, not quite. Echoes could be transferred only to other awakened, while the Grace of Shadows could be bestowed upon anyone with a shadow, presumably. If Sonny wanted to, he could gift the Soul Serpent to a random nightmare creature, like the Mordant Mimic, for example. That would have been funny.
What? No, it wouldn't have.
Why would he give away his precious serpent? Especially considering that the description hinted that doing so would leave him vulnerable. What nonsense was this? Sonny grimaced. Well, not every ability could be a winner. This one was rather useless. He could imagine a situation where lending the Soul Serpent to one of the cohort members would be beneficial, but just barely. It would be easier to just command the creature himself. With a sigh, he commanded the serpent to slither off his skin and present itself for inspection. A few moments later, Sonny flinched back.
What? Where did my cute little snake go?
The shadow had changed a lot indeed. Before, the Soul Serpent had not really been a cute little snake, but its size was at least not too terrible. No more than 6 meters in length at best. But now, a Stygian creature of at least twice that size sprawled through the cabin, its mighty body covered in adamantine jet-black scales and as thick as a tree trunk. Its terrifying maw was wide enough to swallow Sonny whole. Well, at least it could swallow his real human body whole. Its triangular head hovered near the ceiling, 2 tenumbrous eyes looking at him from above. The Soul Serpent was so large that it could barely fit in the confines of the cabin, suddenly making his previously impressive lodgings look small and fragile. Sonny gulped.
What a good boy you are. Nice snake. You can return now, buddy.
The shadow stared at him for a few more seconds, then hissed deeply and moved, its scales rustling on the floorboards. Soon, it turned back into an intricate, beautiful tattoo. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, shaken, and then slowly grinned.
Good. Perfect. If even I'm afraid of that thing, imagine how my enemies will feel.
Sometime later, Sonny commanded the serpent to turn itself into the Black Odachi and sat quietly for a while, glancing at its somber steel. Every centimeter of this weapon was familiar to him, and yet it felt different. The great blade felt sharper, stronger, far more devastating. This was a weapon one could cut a mountain with. He willed the soul weapon to shift into a spear, then a Tang Dao, then a Tachi, and finally a battle axe. All of them felt the same, deadly, and brimming with dark power. Only the axe seemed a little bit off. The serpent could take any form, but was limited by Sonny's knowledge. The better he knew a weapon, the better he could imagine it, to the smallest of details, the greater the result would be. And so, while he could command it to assume any shape, those that he had experience with would produce the best results. He feasted his eyes on the somber steel for a bit, and then put the shadow aside. It was time to check on the rest of his rewards. Since Sonny's mind had been preoccupied with the Soul Serpent and his Aspect legacy for the last few minutes, he decided to continue with that. Summoning the runes one more time, he looked to the bottom of the shimmering field of symbols and concentrated on a certain string.
Aspect Legacy, Shadow Dance. Shadow Dance Mastery Level, 3 out of 7. First Relic, claimed. Second Relic, claimed. Third Relic, claim.
Sonny hesitated for a long time, his face turning grim. What the hell was he going to do if the third relic turned out to be another drop of Ichor? Waste it again?
Curses.
Finally, he inhaled deeply and thought,
Claim.
For a moment, nothing happened. And then, the spell whispered into his ear,
You have claimed an Aspect Legacy relic. You have received a memory.
Sonny gritted his teeth and looked up at the list of his memories. Then a relieved sigh escaped from his lips. It was not a drop of Shadow God's blood. Instead, an unfamiliar combination of runes appeared at the end of the list. It read,
Memory, Shadow Lantern.
Well, this sounded interesting. Sonny read the runes with curiosity.
Memory, Shadow Lantern. Memory rank, Divine.
He fell from the bed.
What?
Another divine memory? Feeling cold sweat rolling down his face, Sonny wiped it off with a trembling hand and slowly clenched his fists.
Well, this should be interesting.
He looked back to the runes, trying to calm his wildly beating hearts. Just what kind of a relic had he received? Sonny got a hold of himself and continued to read the description.
Memory Tier 1. Memory Type, Tool.
A tool. Makes sense. It is a lantern after all. But what does it do? Lanterns are supposed to produce light and illuminate things. That's not exactly what shadows are known for, is it?
With a concerned frown, he looked back at the runes.
Memory Description. Death is just the shadow of life, said the goddess of life. And peace is just the failure of war. Have you ever been something that had not been stolen, made empty, or vile? Have you ever done something that was not futile and hollow? Can you even exist without being cast by another? Look at how weak you are, how small you are. Am I supposed to be frightened of a small shadow? Made pale and feeble by the radiance of day, Shadow laughed and rose from the ground. As he did, his figure swallowed the land, devoured the heavens, and blotted out the light of the sun. Soon, there was nothing left around them but darkness, and from that darkness, a hiss came, making life tremble. Life is just the prelude to death, and war is just the key to open its gates. Everything you cherish, everything you nurture, everything that starts with you will one day be mine. Be welcomed by me, swallowed by me, and find peace within me. This is the mercy of Shadow, hollow, futile. You might have come first, my sister, but when your cruelty ends, I will be all that remains. Sunny shivered.
Damn. Was Shadow God always that creepy?
Due to his closeness and affinity to shadows, he had never thought about the god of shadows as terrifying. After all, even the other gods hadn't held Shadow in high regard, at least from what Sunny knew. His temples had been burned and destroyed, his followers turned into slaves. Even his aspects and attributes seemed to pale in comparison to others. God of peace, death, solace, and mysteries. That sounded humble and rather inconspicuous when compared to something like the goddess of the black skies, the god of storms, depths, of the oceans, of darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster. But things that preferred to remain unseen and unheard were often the most dangerous, weren't they? Sort of like Sunny himself. He shook his head, pondered the description for a bit, and then smiled crookedly.
I guess War God did not like Shadow God after all. Well, that's not surprising. In many ways, they are the opposite of each other. No wonder every time I meet someone from the war camp I end up either having my heart torn out, or, even worse, lured into a nightmare so cursed that all other nightmares ought to give it face.
He sighed, and then continued reading the runes. Memory enchantments, gates of shadow. Enchantment description. This lantern devours light, and can contain and then release an infinite amount of shadows. Sunny blinked.
Huh?
The enchantment didn't seem like much for a divine relic. That was, unless one really thought about the meaning behind those words. Infinite. He suspected that in this case, the word was used to describe an actual infinity instead of a fake one, like with the endless spring. If that was the truth, yes, an object that could contain infinity was indeed worthy of being divine. It simply broke all the laws of reason. However, how did it help Sunny? He frowned a little bit disappointed.
Why couldn't it be a nasty, all-destroying sword instead?
He summoned the memory and saw a small lantern weave itself from darkness in his hand. The thing was not too big, about the size of his palm, and made out of black something. It didn't feel or look like any material he had ever seen, resembling stone more than anything. The frame of the lantern was intricately engraved, making it seem and feel like the scales of a serpent, and its walls were made out of glossy black material. There was a ring of dark metal on its top, with a short chain attached to it. It could be held in a hand or fastened to one's belt if need be. As soon as the lantern appeared, the darkness of night that surrounded Sunny instantly became deeper and colder, oppressive and impenetrable. Any hint of starlight was devoured,
turning the interior of the cabin completely black. He, of course, could still see through that darkness, but anyone else would probably have a lot of trouble. Suddenly full of a pleasant feeling of comfort, Sonny turned the beautiful lantern around and noticed a small door on one of its walls. He hesitated, then commanded the door to open. It instantly slid forward, revealing a square of utter nothingness. A moment later, Sonny felt his hair stand on end and his heart stagger in his chest. He was suddenly cold, overwhelmed by unease, and terrified, like an animal facing something so much larger than itself that the difference in size could simply not be comprehended. He slowly exhaled, the breath escaping from his mouth as chilling mist.
I guess that is how infinity feels.
The lantern was empty, so he couldn't command any shadows to escape it. So instead, he glanced at the happy shadow and raised an eyebrow.
Want to come inside?
The shadow looked at him with fear, then energetically shook its head. Sonny rolled his eyes, then turned to the creepy one.
What about you?
The creepy guy stared at him for a bit, then shrugged indifferently and disappeared into the small door as if he had never been there. Sonny could still vaguely feel their connection, but not in the way that he was used to. He couldn't see, hear, or sense what the shadow was seeing, hearing, and sensing. All he knew was that it still existed, somewhere else, in a terribly vast, dark, and cold place. His face grew dim, and he commanded the creepy shadow to return. The weird guy flowed out of the lantern, shrugged again, and planted himself back on the floor. Then, when it thought that no one was watching, the shadow shuddered and hugged itself for a moment.
What a strange memory.
What was the use of it? Sonny summoned Saint and tried to repeat the experiment, but to no avail. The tenumbrious knight remained motionless when he told her to enter the beautiful black lantern, not showing any signs of knowing how to follow the order.
I guess it doesn't work with shadows.
He frowned, then lowered the lantern to the ground and brought it closer to wild shadows hiding in the corners of the cabin. Then, feeling extremely stupid, Sonny thought aloud.
Do you want to come inside?
The shadows moved slightly, flowing toward the lantern, and then swiftly slid through the black door. A hint of a smile appeared on Sonny's bestial face.
Now we're talking. That I can work with.
Satisfied, he closed the door of the lantern and then dismissed it. Sonny was still a little bit sad that the relic had not turned out to be a destructive weapon, but his disappointment waned. While not as immediately useful, the lantern would allow him to carry friendly shadows, an infinite amount of them, no less, with him at all times. That would counteract the main weakness of his aspect, the fact that most of his abilities only worked within the veil of darkness, to a large degree. And without a doubt, as his powers grew and the number of his abilities increased, having a swarm of deep shadows at hand would only grow more useful. Plus, he had a feeling that he had not discovered all the secrets of the Shadow Lantern yet. But now, it was time to study his last and most important reward. It was time to meet an old friend. The shadow of the Black Steed, whose name was Nightmare. Sonny sighed, then closed his eyes and dove into the soul sea. The tranquil, lightless expanse of his soul was the same as ever. The black water was still and silent, reflecting the 3 dark suns looming in a perfectly even triangle above. only the rows of motionless shadows were different from how they had been before, crowded with countless victims of the Red Colosseum. Despite the fact that Sonny's body was now very different, his soul remained the same. He walked to stand between the three shadow cores and called upon Nightmare. A beautiful black steed walked out of a whirlwind of dark flames in front of him and stopped. Its adamantine hooves sending ripples through the silent waters. The shadow was just as he remembered it, tall and graceful, with a lustrous jet-black coat and lean muscles rolling under the skin. Its mane was long and luscious, and its tenumbrous eyes glowed with fearsome crimson flames. The courser had 2 long horns and a mouth full of sharp fangs that resembled that of a wolf. The horns, the fangs, and the hooves were all forged out of a strange black metal that seemed to be able to compete with the impenetrable onyx of the mantle of the underworld. Sonny shuddered, remembering the pain and shock of being struck and bitten by them. As soon as Nightmare appeared, he felt a whispering fear appear in his mind. Strangely tense, Sonny took a step forward and raised one of his hands, patting the stallion on the muzzle. "Hey there. We meet again, old friend." Nightmare was, indeed, an old friend of his, at least of the part of him that had relived the final day of the Shadow Lord's life and their last exhilarating ride together. But just like Sonny was a different person now, this beautiful shadow was too. The madness was gone from the stallion's crimson eyes, and so was the pain from hundreds of years of sorrow and loneliness. It was as though the black steed was now reborn, still remaining the same being, but also somehow renewed by the purifying darkness of death. As Sonny patted his muzzle, Nightmare pressed it against the calloused hand and looked at his master with a pale, distant hint of recognition. The crimson glow of his eyes ignited with a new intensity, and the black steed snorted. Its voice full of quiet affection. Satisfied, Sonny summoned the runes into existence and glanced at them, curious to see what exactly his new shadow was capable of. He read,
Shadow, Nightmare, Shadow Rank, Awakened, Shadow Class, Terror, Shadow Description. This beautiful steed was tamed by the treacherous lost from light in the depths of a harrowing dream. The two shadows battled across countless nightmares, shattering them all apart. Neither was willing to give up, so in the end, the nightmares did.
Sonny sighed.
Again with that treacherous nonsense. At least the spell did not openly mock me this time.
He still remembered the biting description of Shadow Dance. Shaking his head dejectedly, Sonny rubbed the terrible scar on his neck and turned his attention back to the runes.
Shadow Attributes: Swift, Dark Destrier, Dreadlord, Dreamwalker. Swift, Attribute Description: This shadow is especially swift and enduring. Dark Destrier, Attribute Description: This dark horse was meant to be a shadow warrior's steed and accompany its rider into battle. It is fierce, loyal, and knows no fear. Its speed, strength, and resilience grow when surrounded by darkness and shadows. Dreadlord, Attribute Description: This shadow's might grows the more he is feared. Dreamwalker, Attribute Description: This shadow can travel through dreams.
Sonny studied the black steed with a thoughtful expression. So, Nightmare was incredibly swift and enduring. He was also a war horse, bred to ride into battle without hesitation or fear. What's more, he had two passive attributes that both increased his speed, strength, and resilience. One, when the Destrier and his rider were surrounded by shadows. The other, when the Destrier inspired terror in the hearts of their enemies. That was an insidious and frightening combination, especially because one effect fed into the other, creating a vicious cycle. Perhaps Sonny had only survived the battle with the terror due to the fact that, at some point, his tortured mind had become too broken to experience fear. An awakened terror was already an immensely powerful creature, and with two passive augmentations added into the mix, he shivered.
Scary.
And then there was the last attribute, Dreamwalker. Sonny didn't even know what to think about that one.
We'll see about invading people's dreams later. Wouldn't it be fun to jump into Mordret's mind one day and give him a taste of his own medicine?
With a dark grin, Sonny slowly exhaled and continued to read the runes. Attributes were, without a doubt, very important, especially excellent ones like what Nightmare possessed, but it was the abilities that mattered the most.
Shadow abilities. Flowing Shadow. Mantle of Fear. Nightmare. Dream Curse. Flowing Shadow. Ability description. This steed can dive into shadows and move through them with incredible speed.
Sonny smiled.
So basically it's like Shadow Step without the teleportation part. Still very useful and works perfectly well with my own ability.
He turned back to the runes, mood elevated.
Mantle of Fear. Ability description. This shadow is capable of delivering a continuous mind attack around it that inflicts its foes with crippling fear.
Sonny couldn't help but whistle.
That is just... damn.
The ability to radiate an aura of terror was already incredible enough. It could debilitate weaker enemies completely, and even if more powerful creatures were able to resist some of the effect, a seed of dread was still going to be planted into their minds. And that was directly tied to the Dreadlord attribute of Nightmare, which made him stronger the more he was feared.
Scary. So scary.
It was a good thing that Sonny had been wearing the mantle of the underworld when he met the Black Steed. The onyx armor gifted him with a good amount of protection against mind attacks, after all. With his smile growing both wider and a bit pale, he moved to the next ability.
Nightmare. Ability description. This shadow can create and subjugate nightmares. The more nightmares serve it, the more powerful it grows, both inside and outside dreams. Dormant nightmares. 0.
Sonny stared at the runes for a while, trying to make sense of them. So, Nightmare's Tyrant ability, the one that allowed him to create minions, was meant to subjugate real nightmares. Not any kind of beings made of flesh and bone, but actual dreams. And the more of them served him, the more powerful he grew. These nightmares, it seemed, possessed a rank of their own, which was currently dormant, lower than the Black Steed's own. Additionally, there were currently 0 of them under his authority. But how could one create a nightmare, or subjugate it? Sonny had no idea. What he did understand, though, was why his own journey through the countless nightmares had ended when it did. It seemed that each of the harrowing dreams Sonny experienced had been either collected or made by the original nightmare throughout the centuries, and once all of them were destroyed, he broke free of the Black Steed's hold.
Interesting.
Sonny was going to have to figure out how to get his shadow some minions of its own. Unfortunately, he had a strong feeling that the process was going to be neither straightforward nor easy. With a sigh, he glanced at the last ability that Nightmare possessed. This one was called Dream Curse, but looked different from all the rest. The runes constituting the string were dull and lifeless, as though the ability was not accessible. And indeed, when he tried to concentrate on it, a few new runes appeared.
Nightmares required. 0 out of 1,000.
Sonny grimaced.
Damnation. I guess being a true terror is not that simple.
Still, his new shadow was a fearsome one. Not only was it a swift and mighty steed, but it was also a force on the battlefield in its own right, one that could instill fear in the hearts of his enemies and then feed on it to grow stronger. More than that, it was a true shadow creature, which meant that its attributes and abilities went perfectly with his own. Sonny had experienced the terrifying fury of the Black Courser himself, so he felt giddy, knowing that this fearsome creature was going to be fighting on his side from now on. Gods knew he was going to need as many powerful allies as he could find. His smile dimmed a little. There was one very obvious flaw about Nightmare. It wasn't the Black Steed's fault, of course, but saddened Sonny nevertheless. He let out a deep sigh.
Yeah. If only you came with a saddle.
How was he supposed to ride the scary horse without a saddle? What nonsensical injustice was this? Not wishing to disparage the noble steed, Sonny hid his dismay, patted Nightmare on the back, and grinned.
Good horse, Nightmare. Don't you worry. You and I are going to terrorize so many humans, nightmare creatures, and vile immortals that you'll collect some nasty dreams in no time. They will all be scared of us. You'll see. The only thing scarier than a treacherous shadow is a treacherous shadow atop a magnificent shadow horse, after all. I think that's how the saying goes. Or not. In any case, you and I will do great and terrible things together. If there's no such saying yet, there will be soon.
With a satisfied grin, Sonny dismissed the Black Courser, then left the Soul Sea and lay down on his bed, enjoying its immaculate softness. Tiredly closing his eyes, he thought,
I really deserve some rest.
As the flying ship of a mad sorcerer sailed across the sky, he fell peacefully asleep. By the time Sonny woke up, the ship was already approaching the sanctuary. Looking out of the window, he saw a familiar island below them. In his time, it was occupied by a fearsome, corrupted abomination. He wondered if it was still, or rather, already, nesting there. In any case, from here, the sanctuary was just a couple of chains away. Sonny dressed himself and left the cabin, heading for the upper deck. Once outside, he saw sailor dolls moving around with graceful precision, hoisting sails and performing other tasks. Noctis was standing at the helm, wearing another completely new and exceedingly extravagant robe, while whistling a light-hearted melody. Noticing Sonny, the sorcerer smiled. "Ah, Sunless, how fortunate it is that you are awake. We are almost home." He glanced forward and waved a hand, accidentally sending the ship into a lateral spin. The wooden mannequin somehow remained attached to the deck, but Sonny had to grab a handrail to not be thrown overboard. He gave the immortal transcendent a resentful look. Noctis smiled sheepishly. "Oh, sorry about that." Shaking his head, Sonny ascended the stairs and joined the sorcerer at the bridge, which was situated at the stern of the enchanted vessel. From there, he observed the landscape of the Kingdom of Hope in silence, until a familiar silhouette of a vast ring of menhirs standing atop a small island appeared in sight, surrounded by a white cloud of water vapor that came from several beautiful waterfalls. The sanctuary. It was nice to see it again. In this harrowing nightmare, it almost felt like home. Noctis grinned. "That's it? The sanctuary of Noctis? My beautiful lair. Isn't it pretty?" Sunny hesitated, then took the emerald amulet out of the folds of his black garment and thought, "I guess, but isn't it a bit presumptuous to name it after yourself?" The sorcerer laughed. "Oh, no, you misunderstood. Initially it was called the Temple of the Moon. I built it as a shrine to my great-grandmother. I was perfectly content living there alone, but as the Kingdom of Hope went from bad to worse, stragglers started coming to my lands in search of safe shelter from all the madness. I didn't have the heart, or rather, didn't care that much, to turn them away. So, they started calling it the Sanctuary of Noctis. Why, it's a very nice name if you ask me." Sunny stared at him for a few moments, then said in a somber tone, "Who is your great-grandmother?" Noctis turned to him and blinked a couple of times, an expression of surprise clearly written on his beautiful face. "Well, who else? The goddess of the moon, of course." Sunny paled. How does this even make sense? He gripped the amulet and prepared to say something, then reconsidered and decided not to think about it too much. Noticing this reaction, Noctis shrugged with a confused expression. "Whom did you think I inherited my unparalleled looks from? People as gorgeous as I don't grow on trees, you know. Well, usually. Unless it is a very special tree, I guess." Sunny gritted his teeth and tried very hard not to think anything aloud. Soon, the flying ship descended from the skies and hovered in the center of the ring of giant menhirs, the sacred tree that grew on its deck, situated right above the one growing on a small island surrounded by the pool of clear water, an altar of pure white stone drowning in the shade of its wide branches. Sunny saw dozens of people staring up with odd expressions and involuntarily searched for familiar faces. It was futile, of course. Even if others were somehow here, they were going to look different from their real selves after all. Noctis grinned. "Welcome to the sanctuary. You'll like it here for sure. Everyone here is very reasonable and nice, just like me." Hearing that statement, Sunny shivered. Together, they left the flying vessel and walked through the garden, heading to the sorcerer's private quarters. Coincidentally, the residence was situated in the same place where the Whitefeather clan had established their stronghold in the future. Noctis built his home inside the ring of menhirs itself, however, instead of on top of it. As they walked, Sunny studied the inhabitants of the sanctuary of the past. Most of them seemed like normal people. Some of them were mundane and some were awakened. They didn't seem to be in the throes of madness. However, after the cruel lesson that had been taught to him in the Red Colosseum, he couldn't help but keep his guard up. Sunny's gaze shifted from person to person, evaluating them for potential danger. That young woman holding a young child by the hand seemed harmless, but why was the child so frightened? That man with a neatly trimmed beard seemed gentle and kind, but why was the hilt of his sword so polished and worn? That beggar who sat lonesomely by himself, his body and face disfigured and wrapped in bandages like that of a leper, seemed too weak to pose a threat. But why was his gaze so sharp, his fingers so calloused? And that old woman with a basket of fruit in her arms. Why was she watching them so intently? Sonny shook his head, then looked away. He was letting this world get to him again.
Being vigilant is good, but this is just the madness speaking. Wishing to be safe is also a desire, and so it can also be twisted by hope's influence. After the torments I experienced in the Red Colosseum, and the nightmares, my mind is already unstable. I need to keep myself in check, or something terrible will happen.
What dangers could there be here, in the stronghold of an immortal saint? As long as Noctis himself did not decide to attack Sonny, he would be more or less safe. And speaking of Noctis, the sorcerer led him to a beautifully engraved wooden door, then opened it and led Sonny inside. His residence was just as one could expect, spacious, decorated with the most exquisite furnishings, and populated by all kinds of magical servants. Staring at a mop that was dutifully washing the floors without anyone holding it, Sonny felt cold shivers running down his spine. He had a suspicion of how the sailor dolls were made.
Don't tell me that lunatic actually used someone's soul to enchant this damned mop.
Noctis grinned. I know what you are thinking. Sonny flinched and stared at the immortal with tense apprehension. The sorcerer nodded solemnly. What is for breakfast, right? Oh, don't you worry, Sunless. I take breakfast very seriously. Let us eat, then drink, then talk. He sighed. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I have a couple myself, to be honest. After a full and delightful meal, the two of them sat in silence for a while, enjoying their drinks. Noctis was consuming a truly unwise amount of wine, with an absent-minded smile on his face. While Sonny stuck to tea, the beautiful porcelain cup looked tiny and fragile in his massive clawed hand, sunlight reflecting from the ember surface of the fragrant drink. In this rare moment of peace, he suddenly found himself overwhelmed by apathy and melancholy. Sonny was used to feeling his heart beating with anger, fear, and resentment. But this strange lethargy was new and unwelcome. He didn't like it at all. Searching for a way to entertain himself and chase it away, he suddenly glanced at the immortal sorcerer with a dangerous gleam in his eyes. Sonny lingered for a few moments, and then picked up the emerald amulet. Lord Noctis, you've been a very gracious host to me. You've given me shelter, showered me with gifts, and provided me with many delicious foods. Let me share the traditional food of my people with you as well. That will make me feel better. The immortal transcendent raised an eyebrow and looked at him with doubt. Then, a curious grin appeared on his face. Oh, exotic food. How wonderful. Do you need any ingredients to cook it? Sonny calmly shook his head, then summoned the covetous coffer. The toothy box weaved itself from sparks of light and appeared on the table. Then, it saw the sorcerer, trembled, and scurried over to hide behind one of Sonny's hands. Noctis watched the coffer appear with sincere amusement. Huh? That little creature of yours reminds me of someone. What a cutie. Sonny reached into the box and produced a tube of synth paste, then handed it to the immortal with a polite smile. Noctis took the tube, stared at it in confusion for a while, then brought it closer to his face and sniffed it. Such a peculiar, container? It doesn't smell like anything. Sonny nodded solemnly and made a twisting motion with his hand.
You twist the cap off, pierce the membrane, and then squirt the contents into your mouth. Be warned, though, some people have said that its flavor is simply unmatched, unparalleled even, and that there is no other food like this in the entire world. Many shed tears just from tasting it.
The sorcerer blinked a couple of times after hearing words like membrane and squirt, then twisted the cap off the tube and removed the foil membrane. Finally, he raised the tube with enthusiasm, opened his mouth wide, and sent a stream of viscous, colorless sludge into it. Noctis closed his mouth, chewed a couple of times, then froze. Slowly, his face changed, becoming pale and almost panicked. He glanced at Sonny with wide eyes, shuddered, then slowly chewed some more, and swallowed with visible effort. Sonny continued to stare at him.
Remarkable, isn't it?
The immortal transcendent shivered and forced out a weak smile.
That, is an unforgettable flavor indeed. Truly a dish worthy of being eaten by those following the god of death. Thank you very much, Sunless. I've been really enlightened.
Sonny grinned.
Don't be shy then. Eat some more.
Noctis dropped the tube on the table and energetically shook his head.
No, sadly, I am very full. Thanks for the offer, though.
He reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed his glass, then gulped down all of the wine in one go. Sonny sipped his tea with a satisfied expression.
Serves you right, bastard.
The sorcerer poured himself some more wine, glanced at the tube of synth paste with unrestrained horror, and then furtively moved it further away from himself. Finally, he looked at Sonny and lingered for a few moments. Then, the immortal asked,
So, Sunless, now that we have had a splendid and unforgettable breakfast, are you going to tell me where the glass knife is?
Sonny hesitated for a bit, then answered with a measured thought.
I might. I need to know a few things first, though.
Noctis sighed with disappointment, then reluctantly shrugged.
Knowing things is truly overrated if you ask me, but I understand. Creatures of shadow are known to be drawn to mysteries after all. What is it that you are curious about?
Sonny slowly inhaled, thinking. There were many things he wanted to learn, but the most important of them was rather simple. It carried the most weight for his plans and his future. Was Noctis really capable of defeating the other immortals and breaking Hope's chains? It certainly didn't seem so. As far as chain lords went, the sorcerer was not the most fearsome and terrifying. In fact, his whole persona and attitude made him look rather harmless. Sonny knew, of course, that this was just a mask, and that there was vast and dreadful power hiding beneath it. But would that power be enough to challenge the likes of Solvayne or the rulers of the Ivory City? Both factions had armies, countless awakened, and enough resources to wage a war for centuries, while Noctis only had himself and a few sailor dolls. So, was his desire to unleash hell upon the Shattered Kingdom just madness? Or did he have a solid reason to be confident that there was at least a chance of victory? Sonny was going to make a decision on whether or not to join the sorcerer in this insane endeavor after all, so, knowing the answer was of utmost importance. His life depended on it. He hesitated, and then said, or rather, thought,
How many knives do you already possess?
Noctis smiled radiantly, then answered in a carefree tone. His answer, however, was not at all what Sunny hoped and expected to hear. "What do you mean? I don't have any." Sunny's face twitched, and the porcelain cup suddenly exploded in his hand. He was too shocked to pay it any attention, though.
"What? How can you not have a single knife? You have to have the one entrusted to you at least."
The sorcerer waved a hand.
"Oh, I used to have one, true. But it is sort of... well, these things happened and now I don't have one anymore."
Sunny stared at the immortal transcendent with a stunned expression. He was so befuddled that he even forgot to remove his hand from the emerald amulet.
This guy can't be that insane, right? How is he going to wage war against all of the Kingdom of Hope if he doesn't even have a single knife? I have more of them than he does, goddammit.
Noctis laughed.
So fierce, so straightforward. But don't worry about it, Sunless.
He remained silent for a few moments, drinking his wine, and then sighed.
You see, in the beginning, there were 7 knives, entrusted to the 7 of us to hold the fate of another in their hands. The iron knife, the wooden knife, the ember knife, the glass knife, the ivory knife, the obsidian knife, and the ruby knife.
The sorcerer stared into the distance as if remembering the past. A dark expression appeared on his face.
The iron knife was used and destroyed, and so was the ember knife, so only 5 remain. However, through coincidence or maybe fate, none of the Chain Lords now possess one, except for Solvayne, who wields her own fate and not that of the other.
He smiled.
The Shadow hid the glass knife before his death. No one knows where it is. The obsidian knife had been entrusted to the one in the north, but she lost it to me in a game of wit.
Sunny growled.
Wait, didn't you lose that one too? How the hell did you manage to lose 2 of the damned knives?
Noctis giggled.
Oh, actually I lost 3. I had the ivory knife too at some point.
Sunny groaned, then grabbed his head.
What is wrong with you? Why is all of this so confusing?
The sorcerer remained silent, smiling politely. Finally, he sighed.
Oh, you're right. It is a little convoluted, I guess, for someone who hasn't been living at all for centuries. So, let me start at the beginning and explain to you the fate of each of the knives. Then you will understand why I dare to challenge all the other Chain Lords, and how I hope to defeat them.
Sunny grimaced, then nodded dejectedly. Noctis poured himself more wine, remained silent for a few moments, and then spoke.
The glass knife is the most simple to trace.
Sitting on a plush cushion with a newly refilled glass of fine wine in his hand, Noctis recounted the fates of the 7 divine knives.
The iron knife was destroyed when Lady Adri was murdered, and the ember knife was stolen and destroyed when the Shadow took his own life. Of the remaining 5 knives, the glass knife is the most simple to trace. It belonged to the Shadow, and now it is where the Shadow had hidden it.
He paused and then continued.
The ruby knife, that one was entrusted to me some time ago. Well, I was a bit concerned about my state of mind. Hope's madness is very insidious, Sunless, and not even someone like me is immune to it. So, frightened of what I might do, I gave it to a dear friend of sorts, for safekeeping. Which means that you and I know the location of 2 knives already.
The sorcerer sipped his wine and frowned.
Then there is the obsidian knife, which I won from the one in the north in a game of wit. The others weren't happy at all that I possessed 2 knives, so I, placed it on the altar in my sanctuary and proclaimed that everyone who manages to gather enough of my coins can take it.
A heavy sigh escaped from Sonny's lips.
You did what?
What was wrong with that guy? It was a relic created by Sun God they were talking about. The key to an immortal's death. Why would he just put it where everyone could see it and even put a price tag on it? What madness was this? Noctis shrugged with a guilty look.
Listen, those coins are very precious, I'll let you know. Who could have thought that someone would actually be crazy enough to collect them all? But, someone did. A very determined and reckless young man, in fact. That daredevil took the knife and disappeared. He was probably killed for it, but where and how, no one knows. The obsidian knife was lost, but as I said, these knives never remain lost for long. And here you are, Sunless, wielding it. So,
the sorcerer raised a hand and showed Sunny 3 elegant fingers.
that is 3. The next one is the most curious, the ivory knife. It was entrusted to Severus, the Sun Lord, who gave it to his twin brother, the Sun Prince, and that is where things get strange. The Sun Prince came to me one day with an unusual request. You see, he had hidden the ivory knife and wanted me to erase the memories of where exactly from his mind. He also wanted me to make him forget he'd made the request.
Sunny shuddered.
He destroyed those memories on purpose, even before the terrible torture?
Noctis sighed.
Well, my aspect has to do with souls. I was very close to Adri, the priestess of Heart God, before she was killed by Solvain, that cursed murderer. So, I inherited a few things, and a lot of knowledge from her. That was why the Sun Prince came to me, although I still don't know what his motive was. Regardless, I agreed to help him and removed the memory of the ivory knife's secret location from his mind. However,
the sorcerer smiled.
I did not just destroy it. That would be too boring, don't you think? Instead, I kept the memory for myself and eventually retrieved the ivory knife.
Sunny shook his head.
So, where is it? How did you manage to lose that one, too?
The immortal transcendent shrugged.
Well, the one in the north was still angry with me and wanted a rematch. The stakes were high, and that time, sadly, I didn't win. She got the ivory knife and then threw it into the sky below. That was very silly of her. It is impossible to really lose one of the knives forever, so it was bound to return one day. And recently, it did. I don't know where it is, but it is back. That is for sure.
Sunny looked at him for a while, a somber expression on his face. He was pretty certain that he knew who had the ivory knife. Mordred, the Prince of Nothing. And if that fiend wielded it, even gods would not be able to predict what was going to happen. Noctis, however, didn't seem concerned. He sipped his wine with a smile.
No matter where it is, it will turn up soon enough. So, the only knife that remains is the wooden knife, which is in Solvain's possession. This one is the simplest to get, although not the easiest. The murderous witch, you know, is more than ready to give it to anyone whom she deems worthy enough to try and kill her. So, we don't even need to search for it. Sooner or later, it will fall into our hands all by itself.
Sunny remained silent for a bit, then said in a somber tone,
So, let me get this straight. There are 5 knives. The obsidian knife is in my possession, and the glass knife is hidden in a place that is only known to me. The ruby knife is hidden in a place only known to you. The wooden knife will be given to us by Solvain if we defeat her, and the ivory knife is somewhere out there being pulled toward all this mess by fate.
The sorcerer nodded with a smile.
Indeed. So, you see, while I do not possess any of the knives yet, getting 3 out of 5 would not be too difficult, and the 4th one will naturally appear on my path. 4 out of 5. It doesn't look that crazy anymore. Don't you think?
Sonny hesitated. Yes, it only looked very crazy now, instead of utterly batshit insane. Not a huge improvement, but all he needed to know was that there was a chance of victory. And now, it seemed that there was. Noctis, eccentric and unreliable as he seemed, had not made the decision based on nothing. The sorcerer glanced at him and raised an eyebrow.
So, Sunless, are you going to share the location of the glass knife with me and help me free Hope? Shall we break her chains and free this land and ourselves of a fate worse than death? What do you think?
Sonny sighed. That was a very troublesome question, and completely inescapable at that. However, he could not answer it yet. Looking at the immortal sorcerer, he said,
I can't make that decision alone. I need to discuss it with my friends first.
Noctis blinked.
Oh. Well, why not? It's always good to have loyal friends. Where are they?
Sonny shifted slightly.
I don't know.
The sorcerer scratched the back of his head with a perplexed expression.
I guess we'll have to find them first then. Tell me, what are their names?
Sonny looked away, then cleared his throat awkwardly.
I don't know that either.
Who knew what names the members of the cohort received in the nightmare? Noctis stared at him for a few moments, then asked in an even tone,
You don't know the names of your friends? How interesting. Well, how do they look then?
Sonny smiled sheepishly. Or rather, he tried. With his bestial face and sharp fangs, the result was far from being as innocent and apologetic as he would have wanted it to be.
Actually, I don't know how they look either.
The immortal transcendent slowly took a sip of wine, remained silent for a bit, and then spoke.
So, if I understand correctly, you won't tell me about the glass knife until you have consulted with your friends, but you don't know where they are, what their names are, and how they look. Did I get it all?
Sonny shifted awkwardly, then shrugged.
Yes, but they were supposed to leave me clues of their whereabouts on the Iron Hand Island. That's something, right?
Noctis emptied his glass and looked at him with a strange smile.
Sunless, how do I say this? There is no island by that name in the Kingdom of Hope. Oh, right.
The Iron Hand giant might still be alive and in possession of both his arms, so there would be no Iron Hand Island. Sonny shook his head.
You just know it by another name. It does exist, don't worry. Actually, it is right here, near the sanctuary, so I will have to go there first before giving you an answer.
Noctis looked at him, blinked a couple of times, and then sighed.
All right, then. In that case, wait for a week or two before your new heart settles. Traveling before that would be very unwise. But after that, do go and find your friends. Invite them here, actually. I doubt that there's a friend of yours who is better, smarter, and more beautiful than I, but I'm sure that they are all nice people. Or demons. Or whatever they are.
He smiled and then winked at Sonny with a slightly mischievous look.
I can't wait to meet them.
Sonny did not fully understand what the sorcerer meant by saying that the new heart needed time to settle. Physically, he felt fine. Great, even. Both of his hearts were beating steadily in his chest, powerful and dependable, like relentless machines. However, he had not put them under any strain since the battle with Nightmare, so there was no way of telling how they would behave in a crisis. Remembering the frightening pain of having his heart give out, Sonny decided to take the immortal's word for it and allow himself to rest. He needed rest anyway. While his body had healed, the mind was not that resilient. Sonny felt that his mental state was not in the best of shapes. However, strangely, it was not as bad as he would have expected. After the hellish 2 months he had spent in the Red Colosseum with Elias, their subsequent escape, and the young man's death, Sonny had felt numb and apathetic for a long time. He had gone through the motions of pursuing a simple goal without much emotion, hiding in the darkness as he traveled across the Kingdom of Hope, too hurt and defeated to feel anything. Already, in a damaged and vulnerable state, he had been then thrust into the harrowing succession of nightmares and forced to experience one hideous torment after another. At this point, Sonny could have broken, but instead, unexpectedly, he had found himself full of rapacious determination. That determination had banished the suffocating lethargy and allowed him to endure countless nightmares and continue to fight until there were no horrors left. It was as though the two ghastly experiences clashed and counteracted each other, leaving him in a semblance of a healthy state. Or maybe it was just the matter of suffering a bitter defeat by Solvain's hand, but then refusing to give up and clawing his way to victory in the battle against Nightmare. That victory, costly as it had been, ignited his tortured spirit despite all the suffering it brought, the same way that the previous defeat had extinguished it. Well, healthy was a strong word. Perhaps functioning was more suitable. He could still feel barely closed wounds in his mind, which sometimes made their existence known. And added to that was the invisible, insidious poison of hope. Yes, a week or two of rest did not sound too bad. Sonny had a feeling that soon there would be no such opportunity again for a very long time. After their breakfast conversation, Noctis offered to host him in the luxurious residence. However, Sonny felt that sharing a living space with the eccentric sorcerer would not have been very conducive to peaceful restoration, so he politely refused. In the end, he settled in spacious quarters on the opposite side of the Ring of Menhirs, close to where his small room had been many, many years in the future. His new one was larger and much better furnished. It was comfortable, beautiful, and safe. However, Sonny didn't like to stay inside the room for too long. Being surrounded by its stone walls reminded him of the dungeon of the Red Colosseum too much, so he spent most of his days in the inner garden of the sanctuary. The people living in the former Temple of the Moon did not seem as perturbed by seeing a horned demon walk among them as the humans of the waking world would have been, especially since they knew that Sonny had arrived with Noctis himself. However, they were still tense and apprehensive around him. In the end, Sonny found himself being avoided at all costs, which suited him just fine. Not wishing to disturb anyone unnecessarily, he tended to remain in a corner of the garden where very few people ever appeared. Coincidentally, it was the same place where he used to sell soul shards in the future. His favorite stone, sadly, was usually taken by a leper whose body and disfigured face were covered with dirty bandages. Oh well, life couldn't always be perfect. The first time Sonny sat down on the grass a few meters away from the leper, the man spared the four-armed monster a short glance, lingered for a few moments, and then said in an ugly, grating, hoarse voice,
"What kind of creature are you?"
Sonny looked at the leper, not really wishing to engage in a conversation, then reluctantly produced the emerald amulet and answered,
"A demon. What kind of creature are you?"
The leper smiled, causing a bit of yellow pus to seep from beneath the bandages covering his face.
"A man struck with misfortune, I'm afraid."
Sonny studied the man, then made a grimace and asked in a sullen tone,
"I won't catch whatever it is that you have, will I?"
The leper let out a creaky chuckle.
"No, I'm not diseased, just burned."
Sonny tilted his head a little, then shrugged and turned away. Well, that was an embarrassing mistake. So the leper was not a leper. His body was just severely burned. And, judging by the fact that the rags covering the bandages seemed to have been pristine and white once, he had probably come to the sanctuary from the Ivory City. Sonny wasn't sure that he wanted to know how a citizen of the Sun God's stronghold ended up with all those horrible burns. The memory of their lord's torture was still fresh in his mind. He and the burned man hadn't spoken since that initial, awkward meeting, remaining instead in indifferent silence. Looking at the empty corner of the beautiful garden around them and the distant figures of humans going about their lives, Sonny couldn't help but remember his first day at the academy. Back then, 2 outcasts, Cassia and himself, had been segregated from the rest of the sleepers in a similar fashion. Suddenly in a somber mood, he put the amulet away and thought,
"Some things never change, do they?"
Of course, he would have preferred to be in the company of a beautiful oracle instead of a scarred loner. To be fair, though, he was pretty sure that the scarred man would have, without a doubt, preferred the company of someone like Cassia to that of a ferocious-looking demon. But that was the situation. They were both stuck with each other. 2 frightening loners trying their best not to offend the sensitive eyes of the more blessed people around them. Sonny couldn't help but laugh. This always seemed to be how he ended up. Whether it was in his life before the spell living as a poor urchin, or during his months living alone in the shadow of Gunlog's castle, he always seemed to be the outsider. Even on the few occasions when he was embraced by the people of the world, it was actually a persona like the masked fighter Mongrel that they were cheering on, not him. With a sigh, Sonny threw these thoughts out of his head and closed his eyes, trying to meditate. 2 weeks. That was all the time he had to prepare himself for the encroaching hell of an obliterating war. For the next several days, Sonny did nothing but sleep, rest, and practice weaving. His new wooden fingers were able to channel essence, which showed just how incredible Noctis was at his craft. However, they could not touch the ethereal strings. It seemed that only Sonny's human flesh and bone were capable of that. He was already accustomed to manipulating the shadow strings without those fingers, though, so the task had not grown much harder. There was also the long needle that shone with faint golden radiance to help him along. In those several days, Sonny made a bit of progress in his attempts to copy the simplest of enchantments. He also successfully destroyed several more memories, which really stung his newly repaired hearts.
Curses.
Sonny stared at the rain of disappearing sparks that had been an enchanted buckler just a few moments ago, and sighed. Another failure. Another lost memory. He was going through his collection of them way too fast. At that point, he was starting to wonder if there was a better use for it. Saint's shadow fragment counter was still at 59 out of 200, and now he had another shadow to feed. Nightmare also demanded his fair share of resources to reach the next rank, and his appetite was even steeper. Currently, the Dark Steed was at 1 out of 300, and that single fragment came from a memory Sunny had fed him to check if the horse also consumed them. The only silver lining was that Nightmare was still of the awakened rank, and as such, gained more sustenance from weaker memories. Getting him to 300 was going to require about the same amount as what Saint needed to get to 2. That was another reason why Sunny wanted to master at least the very foundation of weaving. If he could create even the simplest memories himself, he would effectively gain the ability to convert soul shards into shadow fragments, as far as Saint and Nightmare were concerned. Probably. At least, he hoped. He already knew enough to try, and only lacked a few shards to experiment. However, the ability to copy and modify enchantments seemed even more alluring. Just imagining the utility of such a skill made him tremble with excitement. But enough was enough. He could not endure the heartbreaking sorrow of losing another memory today. With each of them he destroyed, Sunny could practically see potential credits disappearing from his theoretical bank account. Shaking his head dejectedly, he returned the needle into the maw of the covetous coffer, dismissed the little box, and headed toward the door of his room. It was time for some fresh air. Finding his way to the familiar corner of the garden, Sunny noticed the motionless figure of the bandaged man and ignored him, then sat down on the grass some distance away. The two of them were perfectly content pretending that the other didn't exist. After that first conversation, neither uttered a single word, which was a beautiful thing. If only all humans were that reticent. The bandaged man never bothered him, and so Sunny liked him a lot. They had a perfect understanding. Closing his eyes, Sunny meditated for a while, but then grew bored. He still had a few hours to kill before dinner, and there was nothing to do. Well, that was not a problem. Really, there was always a mountain of things he had wanted to but never found time to address. For example, he was very curious to study the spell weave of the Shadow Lantern. It was a divine memory after all. But just the thought of staring at the inhuman complexity of weaves again made his mood grow foul. So Sunny decided to return to that task sometime later. What else was there? Come to think of it, he had not practiced archery for a long time now. His skill in that regard was still very far from satisfactory. Sunny thought for a bit, then stood up and summoned Morgan's warbow. The beautiful black bow weaved itself from scarlet sparks, which were the same color as its grip and string, as well as the small brand in the shape of a straight sword piercing straight through an anvil that was burned into its surface. He turned slightly and glanced at the gray stone of one of the giant menhirs that loomed some distance away. Surely the ancient stone pillar that had withstood 1,000 years in perfect condition and was going to withstand thousands more would not be damaged if he used it for target practice. Not that Sunny cared too much. Noctis would just have to produce a new menhir if he destroyed one. Or several. The bastard owed him this much at least. With a short sigh, he raised the bow, placed his fingers on the string, and strained his muscles to pull it back. Due to the unbending enchantment of the fearsome warbow, Sunny needed all of his might, as well as the help of the shadows, just to draw the string. No mundane human would have ever been able to do that. And even among the awakened, only those with aspects providing exceptional physical enhancement could hope to succeed. But thanks to that, Every arrow sent flying by the black bow went especially far and hit with devastating strength. And speaking of arrows, as Sonny was drawing the string, a shadow appeared on it, then grew heavy and solid, turning from a ghostly shade into a sharp arrow. The other enchantment of Morgan's warbow, soul arrows, allowed it to attune to the soul of the wielder and create arrows that shared its affinity. The arrow Sonny just created was utterly black, with dark fletching and a narrow head that seemed to be made out of a sharp piece of obsidian. This was a shadow arrow, which flew swiftly and didn't produce any sound at all. It was also perfect for finding cracks in the enemy's armor. Actually, he could create a different kind of arrow too, due to his high divine affinity. Those arrows were lustrous and seemed to be forged out of pale gold, their broad heads perfect for slicing flesh and causing terrible wounds. There was probably another quality to them, but Sonny had yet to figure it out. In any case, that didn't matter right now. Bringing the string to his ear with some effort, Sonny struggled to hold it in place, then closed one eye, took aim, and jerked his fingers away from the arrow. The string hit the inner side of Sonny's forearm, and the black arrow shot forward with incredible speed. Attracted by the sound, the bandaged man turned his head and stared at Sonny from beneath his dirty bandages. A moment later, the arrow hit the giant menhir, completely off the mark. He had aimed at a tiny crack on the surface of the ancient stone, but had not managed to strike anywhere near it. Looking down at his forearm, which now had a deep cut, Sonny clicked his tongue and let out a dissatisfied growl. Then, he wrapped his arm with a piece of cloth, summoned a second arrow, and repeated the process. This time almost managing to miss the menhir completely. Damnation. It seemed that his accuracy had only reduced in the past months. How had he even managed to grow worse? You're doing it all wrong. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then turned around and stared at the bandaged man without any amusement in his frightening black eyes. Perhaps he was hasty to commend the man for his quiet and reticent nature. Who wanted to hear that hideously grating voice anyway? Producing the emerald amulet, Sonny thought with some irritation. Oh yeah? What are you, an archery expert now? The scarred and bandaged man remained silent for a while, then turned away. I used to be captain of the Sun Legion. Before. He sighed, and then smiled a little. I led 100 brave warriors into battle for the glory of Lord Silverax and the Ivory City. The man grew silent, and then added quietly, Before. Sonny stared at the bandages that covered the man's burned body, then glanced at his soul, which was illuminated by a radiant core of an awakened. So, this guy used to be an officer serving among one of the Sun Immortals. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, How do you end up this messed up then? Where did all those burn scars come from? Did the warmongers catch you? The cripple stared into the distance for some time, then slowly shook his head. You have plenty of scars yourself, demon. Some as terrible as mine. That wicked one around your neck. Where did it come from? Sonny looked down at the crestfallen man, then grinned. What? That thing? Funny you should ask. You see, I did actually get captured by the warmongers once. So, to escape, I tricked the biggest and meanest of them into cutting my head off. Then, I killed him, picked it up,
and put it back on. True story.
He grew silent for a while, and then added nonchalantly,
Oh, and I killed Solvane too. You know who that is, right?
The man stared at him with wide eyes, shock, awe, and confusion mixing in equal measure. Sonny just wanted to mock the guy a little, but the poor fool seemed to have actually believed him. Actually, something about the man's eyes seemed strangely familiar, at least at that moment. Sonny suddenly froze and stared at the bandages hiding the man's disfigured face, his mouth turning dry. A few moments passed in strange silence, and then both of them spoke at the same time.
Kai?
The towering demon and the scarred and bandaged man stared at each other for a bit, their eyes wide with shock.
No way. Was he here all along? Wait, who dared to do this to Kai? When I find the bastard, I'll tear them limb from limb.
Sonny was so stunned that he even failed to let go of the emerald amulet. He gritted his fangs, then asked a question at the same time as Kai did.
Who did this to you? Why are you so tall?
Flustered, the two fell silent for a moment. Then, Sonny reached out and grabbed the bandaged man into a crushing hug, wrapping all four of his arms around him. Who knew? Who knew that this total stranger, who was covered in dirty bandages that smelled of blood and pus, would suddenly become so precious and dear to him?
I was put into the body of a demon. Why wouldn't I be tall?
Kai let out a startled yelp, struggled weakly, and then patted Sonny on one of the arms.
Sonny, I'm very glad to see you as well, but my burns.
Sonny jolted, then hurriedly let go of the bandaged man's body and gave him an apologetic look. Beneath that simple emotion, a dark ocean of fury smoldered with dangerous flames.
Sorry, I didn't...
He paused, still relishing in the feeling of finding a dear friend after feeling alone and lost for so long.
Kai, you're alive. Damn, I'm so happy to see you. I was starting to wonder if any of you guys have made it alive.
Kai looked at him, then smiled. Through the gaps in the bandages, his disfigured face looked so foreign, so unfamiliar. But the sparks glinting in his eyes were the same. Kai sighed.
Yeah, I was fearing the same.
The young man hesitated, and then added, his voice suddenly ringing hollow.
After the Iron Hand Island, I almost gave up hope. I didn't think that I'd see any of you ever again.
Sonny frowned, confused by Kai's words. He dismissed his bow, and then said tensely,
Why? What is on the Iron Hand Island?
Kai looked at him with surprise.
You haven't been there?
Sonny shook his head.
No, I was going to travel there in a week, after my new heart settles. I made a deal with a sorcerer to replace a heart I lost.
Kai stared at him for a bit, then looked down and let out a heavy sigh.
I see. Well, there's not much to tell.
He remained silent for a few moments, and then spoke quietly, his hoarse voice growing even more creaky and grating.
There was no sign that you or Cassia had ever managed to reach the rendezvous point, even though months had already passed. But Effie left a message there, carved into a stone pillar.
So Effie is alive too?
Sonny clenched his fists excited. Of course she was alive. That glutton would never die and leave all the food in 2 worlds uneaten. Encouraged, he eagerly asked,
What message did she leave?
Kai looked away, as if reluctant to answer. After a while, he finally opened his mouth and said quietly,
It was just one sentence.
The young man glanced at Sonny, then added in a somber tone,
Do not come to the Temple of the Chalice.
As it turned out, Kai had reached the sanctuary 2 weeks before Sonny. Although he did not go into detail, the archer explained that he had been sent into the body of an officer in the army of the Ivory City and got entangled in the conflict between the Sun People and the warmongers for the first months of the nightmare. Eventually, he managed to escape and made his way east. The journey was slow and torturous because of how terribly mangled his body was, but he somehow made it to the Iron Hand Island alive, if just barely. There, his hope of reuniting with his friends was cruelly crushed by the fact that neither Sonny nor Cassia seemed to have made it, while Effie had only left an ominous message imploring them to not try to find her. Consumed by terrible pain and despair, Kai left his own message on the island and continued to the sanctuary, where he'd heard that stragglers like him could find refuge and shelter. He remained there ever since, trying to recover as much strength as he could, and hoping against all logic that the others were going to read the message he had left and come to the sanctuary too. And then, through a strange twist of fate, Sonny arrived despite not even visiting the Iron Hand Island. Kai shook his head and said, his voice full of amazement,
How did you even end up here? Arriving on that flying ship, no less. Sonny, do you know who its captain is?
Sonny nodded.
Who else? It's Noctis. That guy goes around insisting that he is now my best friend. The spell sent me into the warmongers' territory, where I was captured and forced to participate in their wicked trials. I barely escaped with my life, and stumbled upon him while fleeing to the southern island. He needed a favor from a shadow creature, and I needed passage to the western parts of the Chained Isles. So, that's how I arrived here on that ship.
He grew silent for a bit and scowled, thinking feverishly. Do not come to the Temple of the Chalice. That was what Effie had written on a stone pillar. However, Sonny had heard of the place before, in the nightmare of the Shadow Lord.
Give the glass knife to the War Maiden in the Temple of the Chalice.
That was what the immortal Shadow had told the original owner of the four-armed demon's body, and that was the secret Noctis wanted to learn from Sonny. Well, Sonny wanted to find his friends. So many coincidences. Kai cleared his throat.
You know who he is, right? Lord Noctis is the master of this place, as well as one of the 5 transcendent immortals. Throughout the Kingdom of Hope, he is feared and revered in equal measure, and his name is synonymous with mystery and power, as well as debauchery, mischief, and disaster. A being like him. Although Lord Noctis is rumored to possess a merciful heart, he is still dangerous and terrifying. Sonny, are you sure that you should be getting entangled with such a being?
Sonny glanced at Kai and remained silent for a while, then said in a grim tone,
There's not much choice. He is the axis of this nightmare. Dangerous, terrifying. Noctis is all that, and so much more. However, all of that is not very important right now.
He sighed, and then turned toward the residence of the frightening immortal with a dark expression on his face.
What's important right now is that he can help us find Effie.
Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then looked at Kai and said with determination,
Let's go.
Kai nodded and followed the four-armed demon. Pushing forward his bandaged body with visible effort, seeing his friend suffering, Sonny gritted his teeth. The archer, meanwhile, glanced at him with a grim expression, and then said in his new, unfamiliar and ugly voice,
Sonny, I have one question. Can you answer it?
Sonny slowed down and turned to him, a deep scowl contorting the bestial lines of his face.
Of course. What is it?
Kai remained silent for a bit, then asked cautiously,
Where exactly are we going?
Sonny blinked a couple of times, then tilted his head a little.
Oh, right. Where else? We're going to talk to Noctis.
With that, he turned around and continued walking toward the immortal sorcerer's residence. The archer hurried to catch up, then said in a stifled tone,
That Noctis? The immortal transcendent? Blessed of the moon, crimson beast of twilight, chain lord of the kingdom of hope and all that?
Sonny glanced at him, then shrugged.
Yes, that Noctis. Don't worry, though. He is indeed terrifying, but not unreasonable.
Together they crossed the garden of the sanctuary and approached the beautifully engraved wooden door. A pair of sailor dolls were standing guard outside, their indifferent faces staring at them with hollow stillness. Noticing Sonny, one of them moved aside and knocked on the door, which then opened all by itself. The two of them entered and froze, unsure how to react.
What the hell?
Noctis was levitating above the floor, his legs crossed and his eyes closed. He might have seemed like a wise sage in the middle of a deep meditation, if not for dozens of empty amphoras of wine that floated all around him. A terrifying chain lord, blessed of the moon, the crimson beast of twilight, was dead drunk. Hearing someone enter, Noctis lazily opened one eye and stared at Sonny, then at Kai. Finally, he landed on the floor and yawned, causing all the amphoras to fall down and shatter, sending drops of wine flying everywhere and staining the luscious carpets.
Ah, Sunless. What a surprise to see you so soon. And, you brought someone with you. What a hideous creature. Oh, wait. Did I say that out loud? No, surely not. I am too wise and courteous to make a rude remark like that, of course. Nice to meet you, whoever you are. Welcome, to my quarters.
He gave them a radiant smile, then waved a hand, causing the whole residence to shudder and the shards of the amphoras to disappear without a trace. Then, Noctis walked over to a small table, picked up a fresh apple, and glanced at his guests with a curious expression.
To what do I owe the honor? To what do we owe? Wait, wasn't it supposed to be the other way around?
Sonny wondered. Sonny frowned, then glanced at Kai, who stared at the immortal sorcerer with an inexorable expression on his burned, disfigured face. Finally, he cleared his throat and turned to Noctis.
Actually, I am here to deliver some good news. Do you remember the friends I told you about? Well, this is one of them. And, yes, you did say it out loud.
The sorcerer stared at Kai, blinked a couple of times, then took a bite out of the apple.
Oh, so this is one of the friends that you were supposed to find after visiting an island that doesn't exist, despite not knowing how they look, where they are, and what they are called. He just happened to be here in my sanctuary. How fortunate.
Sonny smiled,
Indeed. This is Nightingale, my dear friend. A man with the voice of an angel and a face to go along with it.
Kai spared him a sidelong glance, then bowed slightly and forced out a grating, creaky greeting.
It is nice to meet you, Lord Noctis.
The sorcerer shuddered and looked right, then left, then shook his head.
God, Sunless, do not ever mention those creatures again, even in jest. Angels are not something to be called upon whether by name or in passing.
Then he briefly touched the symbol of the moon on his forehead and sighed.
Anyway, I am glad that you have found one of your friends. Have the two of you discussed my proposal?
Sunny hesitated for a bit, then answered somberly.
No, we have not. We still need to find 2 more friends for that. However...
He sighed, knowing that the luxury of having a choice was looking more and more distant by the day. But he needed the sorcerer's help, and his knowledge to find and retrieve Effie from the mysterious Temple of the Chalice. In that particular matter, he was willing to compromise. Even if he gave up the secret of the glass knife, he would still be in possession of the obsidian one. Sunny crossed 2 of his forearms and said,
I am willing to share the location of the Shadow Lord's knife with you, in exchange for some assistance.
Noctis stared at him for some time, then suddenly grinned.
Really? What assistance do you require? I am the most helpful person in the Kingdom of Hope, you know.
Sunny raised 2 fingers.
First, you will help treat my friend's wounds. Second, you will help us rescue another of our other friends from the place she is being held.
He thought for a bit, and then raised a 3rd finger.
Oh, and also coins. You will give me lots of Noctis coins.
The sorcerer ate his apple in silence for a bit, then laughed.
Well, I think I can do 2 out of those 3 things at least. No problem. So, tell me, where is your other friend being held?
Sunny lingered for a few moments, still hesitant to make the bargain. Finally, he sighed and said,
The Temple of the Chalice.
Noctis suddenly choked on the apple, coughed violently a few times, then grabbed a glass of wine and nervously emptied it. The wind outside picked up, almost as if picking up on Noctis's reactions. But he didn't fully give away how he felt about that reveal, at least not yet. With a flushed face, he glanced at Sunny and forced out a strange smile.
1. I think I can do 1 out of those 3 things at least.
Sunny scowled, surprised by that reaction. He glanced at Kai, then motioned for him to sit down. From the looks of it, this conversation was going to be a long one. The archer cautiously lowered himself onto a nearby chair and let out a quiet groan of pain. Then looked around, a hint of curiosity appearing in his cloudy eyes. His gaze lingered on various pieces of furniture and exquisite decorations, then finally settled on the flustered sorcerer. Noctis seemed to have regained his composure somewhat. He stared at his half-eaten apple with a somber expression, then threw it away and sat down himself. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips.
The 3 things you asked for are not that easy to accomplish.
The immortal glanced at Kai, then raised one elegant finger.
I can help your friend Nightingale recover from his wounds. Somewhat. Those burns were not delivered by mundane flames, and so even I would not be able to restore that which was destroyed completely. With my help, he will be able to regain most of his strength and vitality. I can also repair the damage done to his soul, but the scars The flames, their mark will remain. Unless you want me to build him a completely new vessel, of course.
Noctis smiled and then glanced at one of the wooden mannequins, which was in the process of disposing of the carelessly discarded apple.
Something like that, but much better.
Kai shivered.
Will I be able to draw a bow and control soul essence after you treat my body?
The sorcerer nodded.
Of course. You might even grow stronger than you were before. But your face... I am sorry to say this, Nightingale, but it will remain as hideous as it is now. The pain that consumes you will subside, but never go away completely. If you agree to transfer your soul into a doll, on the other hand, your strength will diminish slightly, but you won't have to endure that suffering anymore. I can also promise to make a truly beautiful vessel for you, one worthy of carrying even the most radiant of souls.
The archer remained silent for a while, then smiled.
No need. This face suits me fine. As long as I can draw a bow and help my friends, I will be content.
Noctis looked at him silently, an expression of confusion written clearly on his face.
But don't you want to become beautiful?
Kai chuckled, his voice hoarse and grating. Then he shook his head and said simply,
I already am.
Both Noctis and Sunny stared at the archer with dubious expressions, thinking that he had lost his mind. Or, well, more than anyone else in the Kingdom of Hope had already lost theirs. His disfigured face was a far cry from beautiful. The pain of those scars, Sunny could practically feel it. What was Kai even trying to say? However, it did not seem that Kai felt compelled to expand on that strange statement. He just remained silent, calmly looking at the sorcerer. After a few moments, Noctis turned away and shrugged.
As you wish. The treatment will be long and painful, but it can be done.
Then he raised a second finger and glanced at Sunny.
The other thing you asked for. Lots of my coins, was it? To be honest, how do I say this? No.
Sunny blinked, surprised.
What? Why?
The sorcerer yawned, then made a helpless gesture with his hands.
What can I say? Making those coins takes time. Do you know how long it took me to create a few thousand before? Each coin contains a piece of a corrupted soul. That is why they are so valuable, precious, and coveted by everyone in the Kingdom of Hope.
He thought for a few moments and added absent-mindedly,
Oh, now that you reminded me, only most of the souls were corrupted. I think there were a few humans I fed to the mimic as well. Regardless, all those coins were consumed when that poor fool claimed the obsidian knife from the altar. So, if you really want me to make new ones, I guess I can quickly kill everyone here in the sanctuary and cook up 100 or two.
Sunny shivered, then hurriedly raised his hands.
No need. Let's not kill anyone yet.
Noctis smiled.
Are you sure? Well, all right. So then...
He raised the third finger.
Lastly, the Temple of the Chalice. I am sorry to say this, but there is absolutely no chance of me ever going anywhere near that place again. Not that I could, even if I wanted to. And I don't. Ever.
Sunny stared at the sorcerer with a deep scowl, then gritted his teeth.
Why? What's so terrible about that place?
Noctis shivered, then sighed and nervously sipped his wine.
Oh, it's not that it's terrible. It's just that men aren't allowed to enter the temple unless they are serving a woman. They put that rule in place, after the last time I visited.
Sunny tried to not let his face change, but he simply glared at Noctis, his eye twitching. Uncomfortable under that murderous gaze, the sorcerer shrunk and looked away. A low growl escaped from Sonny's mouth.
Who cares? You are one of the Chain Lords. What can they do if you decide to break that rule?
Noctis chuckled nervously.
You don't get it. Chain Lord or not, Sunless, as I said, my lands became somewhat of a refuge for those who seek it. One of the groups of refugees I sheltered was the remains of an ancient and rather terrifying sect. This sect takes in orphaned girls, especially those born with red hair, and trains them to become perfect vessels of war. His deadly tools, priestesses, and heralds. The war maidens are not to be trifled with.
He grew silent for a moment, and then added,
In fact, they only need my protection because there was a schism within the sect, and one of their disciples left to create her own cult. However, since no one can leave that sect alive, her departure was not amicable. Those who survived it came here to build the Temple of the Chalice, and they have remained there since. Oh, and that runaway disciple of theirs, I think you have already met her.
Sonny grew cold and leaned back, feeling both of his hearts skip a couple of beats. Then he closed his eyes for a few moments. Finally, he spoke in a hoarse voice.
Do you mean to tell me that the sect that dwells in the Temple of the Chalice is where Solvayne comes from?
Noctis nodded and gave him a ghostly smile.
Exactly. That is where that fiend was raised, and there are a bunch of little monsters just like her being trained there as we speak. I mean, no one can really compare to Solvayne, but they are not too far off. So, you can understand why I am reluctant to break my word and make enemies of the War Maidens, right?
Sonny remained silent for a while, and then sighed heavily. Holding the emerald amulet in one of his calloused hands, he thought,
Well, tough luck, because that is exactly where the glass knife is.
Despite his grim mood, Sonny felt a bit of vindictive satisfaction when he saw the sorcerer's handsome face pale, and the glass of wine slip from his hand. A tense silence settled in the opulent residence of the mad sorcerer, who currently was staring at Sonny with an indescribable expression on his pale, beautiful face. Noctis didn't seem happy at all, despite finally learning the secret that he had been searching for all this time. In that silence, Kai's hoarse voice suddenly resounded, full of polite curiosity.
I am very sorry, but that glass knife you were talking about, why exactly do we need it?
Both Sonny and Noctis turned to him. After an awkward pause, the immortal scratched the back of his head and answered,
That is the only thing that can kill Severus, the Blessed of the Sun, and I really, really want to kill him.
Noticing a slight confusion on the archer's face, he thought for a moment, and then added,
Right, these days people call him Severax, the Ivory Lord. You have heard of him, yes?
Kai lingered for a bit, then looked down at his bandaged hands and said evenly,
Yes, you might say that I have.
He closed his eyes for a moment, and then smiled.
In that case, we must retrieve the glass knife and our friend. Lord Noctis, surely there is something that we can do. You know a lot about this sect of theirs. Is there a way for you to enter the Temple of the Chalice, find both the knife and our friend, and bring them back to the sanctuary?
Noctis stared at him for a while, then shook his head.
No, there is no way for me to invade the temple. At least not without destroying it completely, which would doom that friend of yours along with the rest of the sect. Sadly, that is also one of the places I can't infiltrate in disguise. Infiltrate it again, I mean.
Sunny and Kai glanced at each other, and then the archer cautiously asked,
If that is the case, what if we infiltrate it instead?
The sorcerer stared at them in surprise and then laughed.
Sunless and Nightingale, what a strange pair you are. Do you not know fear? I have just told you how frightening the war maidens are.
Sunny smiled, showing his sharp fangs, and then shrugged. Kai shook his head and answered for both of them, saving him from having to do so.
On the contrary, both of us are actually very cowardly. But Lord Noctis, you might not know this, but Sunless and I, we can be a bit frightening ourselves.
The immortal transcendent gave them a dubious look and then shook his head.
Somehow, I believe it. But no, it doesn't matter. Even if you are willing, you can't get into the Temple of the Chalice. Only women are allowed inside, and not just any women. They will only give passage to female warriors of utmost skill, those who are veiled in dread and the smell of numerous bloody battlefields. Maybe with a couple of lowly servants at best. You're both men, so it is useless to even try.
Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then sighed deeply and said,
Actually, that won't be a problem.
Noctis blinked a couple of times and looked at him with confused amusement.
How so?
The sorcerer gave him a strange look and then asked with a mischievous smile,
Sunless, is there something I don't know about you?
Sunny glanced at him darkly, scowled, and answered in a sharp tone,
There's plenty, but that was not what I meant. I just have a female warrior of dreadful skill at hand.
With that, he summoned the saint. 2 ruby flames ignited in the depths of his shadow, and then the taciturn demon stepped out of it, wreathed in darkness. Her graceful figure appeared in the middle of the sorcerer's residence, and then the shadow turned her head slightly, staring at the master of the place with cold indifference. Noctis looked back at her, his eyes widening. His lips trembled.
That.
The sorcerer leaned forward, his expression frozen, and then suddenly clenched his fists with excitement.
That armor! The design, the fit! Oh gods, who forged that masterpiece? Sunless, please tell me.
The saint lifted her head a little, while Sunny and Kai stared at the immortal transcendent with inexorable expressions. After a few moments of dead silence, Sunny cleared his throat.
Actually, I'm not sure. It was the Prince of the Underworld, I think. Wait, haven't you seen me wearing similar armor?
Noctis glanced at him with confusion, then waved a hand dismissively.
If I did, you must have not done it justice. This beauty, however. So, it was Hope's little brother, huh? Who knew he had such impeccable taste?
Finally, the sorcerer became aware of his surroundings and moved his gaze up, staring right into Saint's ruby eyes. His smile widened, but then grew rather strange. He glanced at Sunny with confusion.
Sunless, is this one of your shadows, yes? How come she is more powerful than you? Oh, did you inherit the sublime creature from the Shadow Lord? That rogue? He had been hiding such a treasure from me all that time.
Sunny did not like the way Noctis was looking at the saint. Not one bit. He suddenly felt a very strong impulse to wipe the lecherous smile off the immortal's face, which would not have been very wise considering who that immortal actually was. He gritted his teeth.
No, if you must know, I've created her myself. And also, she can hear you. Have some manners, will you?
Noctis froze, then flinched, and suddenly turned very courteous.
My apologies.
He glanced at the saint and walked around her, studying the taciturn demon with a very serious expression. The shadow didn't move, seemingly uncaring of his presence. Finally, the sorcerer returned to his previous spot and smiled.
That shadow of yours might indeed be allowed into the Temple of the Chalice. She has a presence about her. Even I am impressed. The two of you will pose as her servants, I assume.
Sunny and Kai looked at each other and then nodded. The sorcerer turned away, thinking, then said thoughtfully,
That might actually work. Once you are inside, you can find your friend and locate the glass knife. That will be extremely dangerous, but not impossible. If you succeed, I can ensure your safe escape. However...
Noctis glanced at them, his expression growing somber.
Sunless, Nightingale, if things go wrong inside the Temple of the Chalice, even I won't be able to save you. You will be on your own. So, ask yourself, seriously, whether or not rescuing your friend is worth risking your life over. You can make new friends, you know, but you can only die once.
Kai looked at the immortal sorcerer and smiled.
It's worth it.
Sunny wasn't so quick to speak. After a while, he snorted and looked away.
I don't make friends easily, so the ones I do have are extremely valuable. One has to protect their valuables, you know. That's just basic logic.
He felt uncomfortable admitting it, but he cared for Effie. And for Kai. He couldn't bear the thought of losing them, so he pushed that as far from his mind as possible. He glanced at Noctis with a dark expression and added,
Besides, who says that you can only die once? I have already died 100 times, and that was just after meeting you. Killing me is really a very troublesome endeavor.
After their conversation with Noctis was done, Sunny and Kai left the sorcerer alone. The immortal needed some time to make preparations, so they had a few hours left before the archer's treatment was to begin. After that, they were not going to see each other again until it was over, which would take at least a week. Walking through the beautiful garden of the sanctuary, Kai remained silent for a bit, and then said with a smile,
Well, I think that went well.
Sunny glanced at him with a dark expression.
You think?
The archer shrugged, then frowned a little. The bandages covering his disfigured face moved, revealing a confused expression.
Did it not?
Sunny shook his head.
No. We have been swindled, actually. Think about it. I wanted to get 3 things out of Noctis in exchange for revealing the location of the glass knife to him. Heal you, rescue Effie, and receive his enchanted coins. Not only did he force the secret out of me without even lifting a finger, he even fooled us into retrieving the knife in his stead. Well, thinking that it was our own idea, no less.
He grimaced, then let out a heavy sigh.
Scary. He's a cunning trickster, and my own mind seems to be dulled by the curse of hope. Still, all is well. Noctis will heal your body. Nothing else matters.
Kai frowned when Sunny mentioned Hope's influence, but didn't ask anything, revealing that he had made the discovery himself. After a while, he said,
When you put it like that, I do feel a bit foolish. But, Sunny, if you knew that we were being swindled, why didn't you try to drive a harder bargain?
Sunny shrugged.
There was no point to. I did not expect him to honor all 3 of my requests anyway. 2 of them were just for show. While those coins of his are useful, I can do without them. As for rescuing Effie, that is our own task. I would not have entrusted it to an outsider, especially an ancient transcendent with mysterious motives." He remained silent for a few moments, and then added, "We will have to ally ourselves with at least one of the Chain Lords in order to conquer this nightmare. But becoming dependent on someone else's strength is a slippery slope. In the end, we can only put trust in our own efforts." Kai tilted his head a little.
"So, those 2 requests were just bait, and your real intention had only been to get Noctis to heal me."
Lost in thought, Sonny simply nodded. The archer smiled, then mumbled under his nose,
"I wonder who swindled whom then."
They reached their corner of the garden in silence and sat down on the grass. There was so much Sonny wanted to tell Kai, and so much he wanted to ask. He was sure that Kai felt the same. But without even having to say anything, both of them decided to remain silent. They had already shared some things about their experiences in the nightmare, and as for details, that was going to have to wait until the cohort was back together. Even knowing that it was foolish, they both held on to the feeling that by postponing this conversation, they were somehow increasing the chances of the other 2 members joining them unharmed. After a while, Kai asked,
Do you think that she's all right? Effie, I mean. From what Noctis said, that sect is incredibly ancient, formidable and cruel. If Effie was sent into the body of a disciple, with her temper, I hate to admit it, but I am afraid of her. Plus, none of the maidens are allowed to leave that temple alive. How are we going to take her away?"
Sonny remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head.
"Effie is more resilient than any of us. Don't forget, she survived in the Dark City far longer than you or I, completely alone. She held the line during the siege of the Spire and survived that, too. Effie will be fine. The War Maidens are not as formidable as you might think, either. After the Temple of the Chalice is destroyed in the future, all of them die. I've seen the bones myself."
His face grew somber when he remembered the furious wraiths whom he had slain to create his 3rd core. Who could have known that the ruin he had already explored and the Temple of the Chalice were one and the same? Judging by the destruction that reigned over the ancient temple in the future, someone was going to obliterate the fearsome sect between then and now. The War Maidens weren't invincible. Kai sighed.
"What about Cassia? There is no sign of her. She is not like the rest of us. Her combat skill is commendable, but her aspect was not tailored toward direct confrontation. And with how terrible her flaw is..."
He grew silent, reluctant to finish the thought. Sonny grinned.
"Cassia? She's the last person you should be worried about. Believe me, she is doing fine. Probably better than any of us."
At least, that was what Sonny wanted to believe. His flaw did not prevent him from saying those words aloud, so he must have been convinced that the statement was true to some degree at least. However, that didn't stop his heart from growing cold and heavy. He sighed, and then added in a grim tone, "Who you should really be worried about is our 5th friend." Kai frowned and looked at him with a dark expression.
"It has to be that person, right? The Prince of Valor?"
Sonny hesitated, then nodded.
"That is what I believe as well."
The archer gritted his teeth and turned away.
"It doesn't matter. Here in the nightmare, all of us are allies, are we not?"
Sonny looked down, his black eyes growing even darker. After a while, he said,
"We are meant to be. However, that doesn't mean that we have to be."
He sighed and then looked at the people going about their lives in the distance.
Mordred is unpredictable and dangerous. I don't know what his goals are, but in this nightmare, his power would have grown considerably. Don't forget that he was the one who discovered the seed in the first place, and that wasn't by accident. He was searching for it on purpose. He is after something.
Sonny grew silent for a few moments, and then added, his voice turning grim.
Plus, there was already something wrong with Mordred in the waking world. Who knows what effect Hope had on him? If he had truly gone insane.
He shuddered.
Then the immortal saints might end up not being our biggest problem.
With that, Sonny stood up and summoned the vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud, then glanced at Kai with a strange glint in his eyes.
Anyway, since we have a few hours left before Noctis straps you to a table and does spell knows what to your body, how about you show me how to properly use a bow? Well, you still can. Well, there's a chance, I mean.
The sun was slowly drowning the darkness of the void, and, as it did, a veil of shadows was devouring the world. The western horizon was still aflame with the scarlet pyre of the sunset, but the somber night was already approaching from the east. On a desolate island covered by tall pillars of jagged rock, a numinous temple stood, its beautiful stone walls painted red by the light of the drowning sun. All around it, countless swords were thrust into the petrous ground, rising from it like a solemn graveyard of steel. There was only one path through the forest of blades, and as the twilight of dusk approached it, a dull, echoing ringing suddenly resounded from the darkness, then traveled through it, slowly growing closer and closer. It was the sound of adamantine hooves ringing against stone. Soon, 4 crimson flames ignited in the shadows and then revealed themselves to be 4 eyes. 2 belonged to a Stygian stallion, the other 2 to its dark rider. The steed was black as night, with dreadful horns crowning its head. It walked forward with a steady pace, fearsome and noble, lean muscles rolling under its lusterless coat. The rider was a graceful woman in intricate onyx armor, her face hidden behind the visor of a closed helmet, with only ruby lights shining through it with indifferent resolve. Her presence was both calm and fearsome, full of quiet confidence and frightening strength. The blade of a great Odachi rested on her shoulder, its steel as dark as the heart of the night. 2 steps behind the taciturn knight, 2 creatures walked with their gazes lowered to the ground. One was a towering 4-armed demon dressed in a black kimono, his dark hair tied with a silk ribbon. The other was a strange human with skin that resembled polished bark, wearing a fitting dark garment made of soft silk. His disfigured face hidden behind a wooden mask and drowning in the shadow of a deep hood. Neither of them was armed. The Dark Knight led her horse to the first steps of the path through the graveyard of swords and stopped, waiting. Her ruby eyes burned with cold calmness, as if the woman had a heart made of stone, incapable of feeling fear, unease, or trepidation. Her servants, however, were not as aloof. Both stole glances at the magnificent stone temple, tension clearly written on their faces. After a few tense, silent moments, the human asked quietly,
"It is too late to turn back, isn't it?"
The demon did not respond. Not that he was capable of speaking in the human tongue. Instead, he simply nodded, then froze, as if sensing something. The other servant sighed and grew silent as well. There was no one and nothing around them, just the pillars of jagged rocks and the swords thrust into the ground. The island was awash in the blood-red radiance of the dying sunset, with deep shadows nesting in the spots from where the sunlight had already fled. A gust of wind suddenly blew, bringing with it the smell of iron. And then, out of nowhere, they were surrounded by a dozen silent figures. All of them were beautiful women, wearing light garments made of red silk. Their bodies were slender and supple, their skin smooth and soft. The sight of them might have been alluring, if not for the sharp coldness of their eyes, the ruthless expressions written on their faces, and the murderous glint of their blades, all aimed at the uninvited guests. Sonny shivered.
Damnation.
Noctis had not been joking when he described the war maidens as fearsome. Even though these women were just awakened, his intuition was screaming that they represented mortal danger. However, Sonny did not need the help of his enhanced sixth sense to understand that. The feeling he got from the female warriors was the same as he had experienced a few times before in his life when facing true battle masters. Morgan of Valor had given him the same frightening sensation, as well as Gregor, Master Jet, Nephis, and a couple of others. All of them elite combatants of the highest tier. Some of these fiends he had fought and somehow survived, but not without shedding a lot of blood and receiving deep scars, if not on his body, then on his soul. And right now, he was staring at 12 of such monsters, and these were just the sentinels, no doubt. Who knew what kind of battle saints he would meet inside the temple? No wonder this sect had been Solvain's cradle. Full of bad premonitions, he made sure to not make any sudden movements and continued staring at the ground. His role during this part was rather simple. He just had to do nothing. Her master might have been apprehensive, but the saint didn't seem concerned at all. She turned her head slightly and looked down at the war maidens, her gaze as calm and indifferent as always. Noticing her calmness, a few of the female warriors gripped their weapons tighter. One of them, a tall woman with red hair and eyes the color of steel, frowned a little, and then asked in a raspy voice,
What brings you to the Temple of the Chalice, Demoness?
Saint, of course, remained silent. Instead, Kai took a step forward and bowed, then spoke, his ugly voice sounding like grating scritching of rusty metal.
Greetings, warriors, my lady.
The war maiden looked at him with distaste and interrupted.
Who allowed you to speak, man?
Kai remained bowed for a few moments, then straightened and looked at the woman from beneath his hood.
My lady's voice is not for you to hear. She only speaks to those who bested her in combat, and thus she has not spoken ever since taking this solemn vow.
The war maiden remained silent for a few moments, studying the saint's graceful and fearsome figure. Then she smiled darkly.
She must not have fought anyone worth fighting, then. You are her servant?
Kai nodded.
Indeed, I am her voice, and that creature over there is her shadow. We serve the lady.
The woman lingered for a moment, then glanced at him and raised an eyebrow.
What is a human like you doing in the company of two shadows?
The archer remained silent for a few seconds, and then responded.
A long time ago, evil people captured me and locked me in a deep, dark well. I was going to die in there of thirst and hunger,
but my lady lifted the heavy grate and helped me escape, while that demon slaughtered the evildoers. I owe them a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid."
The War Maiden stared at him silently, then nodded.
You speak with sincerity. Surprising for a man. Tell me then, why has your lady come to our temple?
Kai glanced at the saint and hesitated for a bit. Sonny felt his heart start to beat faster as well. This was the most dangerous part of their plan. In fact, he was still not entirely sure that it was going to be a wise move. However, both of them had decided that, while not very wise, this was something that would give them the best chance to succeed. Full of tense anticipation, he silently gritted his teeth. Finally, the archer looked at the War Maiden and said, his voice calm and steady,
"She has come to take back that which belongs to the shadows, to retrieve the death of the Ivory Lord from your hands, whether you are willing to return it or not."
The glass knife contained the string of fate that belonged to Severax, the Chain Lord of the Ivory City. It was his death blade, which the War Maidens had received from the Saint of Shadows hundreds of years ago. Now, 2 shadows had come back to retrieve it. Sonny suspected that none of the sect members that had been alive all those centuries ago lived still, including the particular maiden to whom the Shadow Lord had sent the glass knife before taking his own life. As such, none would remember the 4-armed demon who had delivered it, most likely. And yet, the current disciples of the cult had to know what was being kept in their temple, and how it got there. So, there was a chance that they would just hand it over to the original owners, albeit a slim one. If not, they would allow the saint and her entourage inside at least, or that's what Sonny had hoped. Judging by the fact that the maidens did not immediately attack after hearing Kai's provocative statement, his calculations were not wrong. At least, not entirely. The tall woman who had spoken to them grew still as soon as the glass knife was mentioned, a somber expression appearing on her face. She studied the saint's motionless figure and then spoke coldly, her raspy voice growing slightly hoarse.
So, the day has come. How fortunate we are to witness it. Someone finally dares to challenge the Red Sect for the ownership of the ancient relic. Who knew that I would witness this children's story come true?
She smiled darkly, then tilted her head, no humor in her sharp gray eyes.
However, you are wrong, Shadow. The glass blade does not belong to you or any of your kin. It had been entrusted to our foremother, who passed on the duty of protecting it to her wards, and through them, to us.
The woman lingered, then sighed.
However, it is not my place to put you in yours. Come, demoness. Let me welcome you to the Temple of the Chalice.
With that, the War Maidens slowly lowered their weapons, and then followed their leader as she turned to walk on the path through the graveyard of swords. Surrounded by them, the Saint, Sonny, and Kai had no choice but to walk forward. After a few moments, the taciturn demon gracefully jumped down from Nightmare's back, who then dissipated into shadows and returned to Sonny's soul. Despite the fact that the beautiful female warriors had sheathed their swords, their hostility remained aimed at the 3 strangers, and their gazes were still as sharp and dangerous as steel blades.
What an unfriendly bunch.
Sonny sighed inwardly, and then looked around through his shadows, paying attention to the countless swords thrust into the ground all around them. Somehow, he felt that each of these weapons had a history, a violent story of battle and bloodshed that ended in death. Perhaps some of these blades had once belonged to the war maidens of the past, but most must have been wielded by those warriors slain by the members of the sect. There were so many swords thrust into the ground around the stone temple. Soon they approached the gates of the magnificent structure and were led inside. Sunny was somewhat familiar with the interior of the ancient shrine, but it was hard to bring together two pictures that lived in his mind. One of a desolate ruin, the other of the austere, formidable, and perfectly maintained temple fortress. They were ushered into a spacious entrance hall, where the saint followed his command and stopped, as though unwilling to go further. The tall maiden with gray eyes glanced at her and smiled coldly.
Wait here, demoness. I will inform the elders of your arrival and your challenge.
Saint stood with the blade of the soul serpent resting on her shoulder, motionless like a beautiful statue cut of black onyx. Her presence was aloof and indifferent, as though the three of them were not surrounded from all sides by fearsome warriors with no way to escape. The tall maiden left, but the rest of the sentinels remained, surrounding them in a wide circle. Their faces were calm, but their eyes remained sharp, steady hands laying on the hilts of their swords. Under their gazes, Sunny didn't dare to send one of his shadows to scout around the temple. However, he also didn't need to. Instead, he listened to the sounds surrounding them with curiosity. The Temple of the Chalice seemed silent, but somewhere far away, a repeating sound could be heard. The sound of something blunt hitting flesh over and over again, and an occasional rattle of chains. Disturbed, he frowned slightly and then glanced at Kai. The archer stood on the other side of the saint, his face hidden in the shadow of a deep hood. His pose seemed both polite and relaxed. However, Sunny could feel a strange tension hidden behind this casual stance. He frowned and then moved his hand slightly, attracting his friend's attention. Kai lingered for a moment, then spoke softly, barely a whisper, in the language of the waking world, without turning his head.
Yes, I found it.
Why would Sunny need to use his shadows to explore the temple if he had Nightingale by his side? Kai's awakened ability, after all, allowed him to see far and wide, and even peer through solid objects. Very few things could hide from his gaze. So, his task was to locate one of the two things they were looking for, the glass knife. And just in a few minutes, he had already succeeded. Kai, however, did not seem too happy.
Sunny, I think we might have a slight problem.
Sunny gritted his teeth.
Damnation.
Of course, this would not be easy, but still, Sunny's shoulders sagged in disappointment. Sunny scowled, the tone in Kai's voice. No, he did not like that one bit. Sunny turned his head slightly, glaring at the young man in the wooden mask. The archer sighed.
In the center of the temple, there is a large hall, and in the center of that hall stands a giant stone chalice. The chalice is filled to the brim with raging white flame. That fire is just like the fires that burn in the sky below. In fact, I'm pretty sure that one of those orbs of divine flame is somehow contained within it.
He lingered for a moment, and then added grimly,
The glass knife is on the bottom of the chalice, right in the middle of the annihilating divine flame.
Damn it all. Why did it have to be the divine flame of all things?
The three of them were finally allowed into the central hall of the temple, where a tall chalice cut of a single slab of gray stone stood, full of blinding white fire. The hall was drowning in stark light, deep shadows, and suffocating heat. This close to the orb of the sun god's flame, all of them should have already turned to ash. Sonny stared at the chalice with a grim expression, remembering the suffering he had gone through in the sky below. This was a true remnant of the obliterating pillar of white fire that had been brought down on the kingdom of hope by a god, and then continued to burn in the depths of the shattered land, slowly devouring it until nothing but an empty void remained. The pale version of it that he was able to channel through the cruel sight was already immensely destructive, and this was the real deal. How was the chalice even capable of containing the annihilating white star? He shivered and then glanced under the surface of the stone vessel. He noticed an intricate weave of ancient runes glowing inside the gray stone. An enchantment, and a powerful one at that. What kind of sorcerer had created it? Who had been powerful enough to contain a piece of divine fury? In any case, without knowing how to control the enchantment, if there even was a way to control it, getting the glass knife out is not going to be easy. Or maybe even impossible. Their task just grew exponentially more difficult.
Damn it all.
Absorbed by the dire sight of the stone chalice, Sonny didn't even notice the three women standing in front of it for a moment or two. When he did, however, his mood dropped even further. Turned into black silhouettes by the furious white flames burning behind them, three ascended battle masters watched the uninvited guests with eyes full of cold, cutting, killing intent. One had red hair and wielded an odachi similar to his own, its blade forged out of vibrant scarlet steel. One had black hair and held a simple spear, its shaft covered by a complicated weave of runes. One had white hair and was unarmed. The last one scared him the most. Solvain, too, didn't feel the need to wield a weapon. If the first two maidens seemed like warriors of terrifying skill, the third one gave him a sensation of being something much more. A true vessel of war. He carefully looked around the hall, remembering how it had looked in the future. The stone slabs covering the floor had been cracked and misshapen, the mighty pillars broken and toppled over, and the roof had collapsed. The walls of the hall, seemingly so strong and unassailable, had been shattered outwards, suggesting that something had detonated in the center of the hall with tremendous force. The chalice itself had been destroyed, with only a few fragments laying on the floor in a molten pile. And there had been human bones littering the hall, some still covered by the remains of red silk garments, with vengeful wraiths carrying murderous fury even thousands of years after the tragedy. Sonny glanced tensely at the dancing white flame, then shivered. Someone had come to the temple of the chalice and destroyed it, slaughtering all the fearsome maidens in the process. Had they been looking for the glass knife as well? Was he going to meet that terrifying being? Or had he, perhaps, met them already? Two faces suddenly appeared in his mind, that of Solvain and that of Noctis. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the ascended maidens, the woman who seemed the most powerful, The fiend with white hair looked at Saint with a cold expression and spoke, her voice echoing in the stark darkness of the hall.
I've been told that you wish to retrieve the legacy of our foremothers, Shadow.
The saint lingered for a moment, then moved her head slightly, nodding. The maiden smiled, sending chills running down Sunny's spine.
Then your task is very simple. All you have to do is prove yourself before the chalice. Kill me, and then my two sisters. If you do, the glass blade will be yours.
The saint tilted her head a little, expressing an indifferent agreement. Sunny let out a furtive sigh of relief. So, there was a ritual to release that glass knife into someone's hands after all. A trial that those seeking it had to pass. A simple duel, or rather 3 consecutive ones, against the senior warriors of the ancient sect. These Ascended were truly formidable, but fighting them was better than having to face against the entire sect. His worst expectations had not come true. As for whether or not Saint would be able to kill the 3 Ascended priestesses, he wasn't sure. However, there was at least a chance. After the leaders of the sect were dead, finding and rescuing Effie would be much easier. As the war maiden with the white hair grew silent, another one, the woman wielding the scarlet Odachi, spoke.
However, first, you will have to prove that you have the right to challenge us. You will fight and kill a disciple of each of us.
As soon as she stopped speaking, the third one said,
Or you will die.
Sunny hid a triumphant smile. 3 awakened warriors were not going to pose any threat to Saint, who was an ascended demon and formidable well beyond her rank and class. However, something felt off. He couldn't tell what at the moment, but his intuition filled his heart with unease. Sunny glanced at Kai and noticed a similar apprehensive expression in the archer's eyes. He nodded slightly, prompting the young man to step forward and bow.
My lady accepts. However, it is unbecoming of her to slaughter your disciples, fearsome as they may be. Such a fight would not be a struggle for her, and as such would not please the goddess of life, offending her in this sacred temple. If these disciples wish to challenge my lady, they will have to defeat her shadow first.
The war maiden with white hair laughed, then took a step forward.
So, she can only fight us after defeating our disciples, but our disciples can only fight her after defeating her pet demon? Fine. Fine. Let it be so. No shadow can defeat a vessel of war. He was going to die after your lady's body was torn apart anyway. Let the creature be destroyed first.
With that, she turned to one of the younger war maidens and smiled darkly.
Let us not disappoint our guests. Go, bring the feral child I have the misfortune of calling my successor here. She will atone for her transgressions today by killing these 2 shadows.
Sunny was pushed forward and offered a choice of weapons. After hesitating for a few moments, he raised a fearsome greatsword with his upper hands and took a buckler and a long dagger with his lower. Then, he walked into the center of the hall and froze, watching the divine flames burn in the darkness. All things considered, things had turned out well. The ascended war maidens had been cunning, offering the lives of their disciples as sacrifices, no doubt in order to glean the secrets of Saint's skill before facing her. Knowing the enemy was half the victory after all. By remaining a mystery while observing how their opponent fights, the 3 battle masters would have received an advantage that Sunny couldn't allow himself to give them. Now, however, he was going to have to fight and kill 3 of the awakened maidens, thus keeping the saint as mysterious as these battle masters were. Facing such fearsome opponents was not going to be easy, but he was sure of his ability to outsmart, outpower, and slaughter them. Fighting such skilled warriors was only going to enrich his mastery of shadow dance. More importantly, they were not going to have to fight against the whole sect. The chalice containing the divine flame was not going to be shattered, and the temple was not going to be turned into a ruin. Whatever it had been that had happened here in the real world would not befall Sunny and Kai, leaving them unscathed. All he had to do was to kill 3 young women, one after another. They would be fearsome combatants, no doubt, especially due to the madness of hope coursing through their veins, but he had faced far worse. Sunny felt confident in his ability. A few moments later, however, his black eyes narrowed. Staring at his first opponent, Sunny couldn't help but shudder and let out a low growl.
Damnation.
When Sunny heard the white-haired war maiden refer to her disciple as a feral child, he assumed that she was speaking about an especially ferocious female warrior being trained in the ancient sect of war. What he had not expected, however, was that his enemy would turn out to be a literal child.
Damnation.
As Sunny watched with a grim expression, 2 of the awakened maidens dragged a girl of about 11, maybe 12 years of age into the hall, then threw her on the stone floor in front of him. The girl had a scrawny, juvenile body that did not seem to have touched on the path to maturity yet. Her short, wild hair was of a vibrant red color, almost the same as the torn silk garments she wore. Her skin was pale and white, or at least, it was supposed to be. Instead, it was blue and black, almost the same color as Sunny's own, which had been made to resemble obsidian by the embrace of his shadows. The girl had obviously been often and cruelly beaten, to the point that it was hard to notice a spot free of bruises on her once tender body. The whites of her eyes were hidden by the cloudy red layer of blood that had burst from ruptured vessels, making the child look like an actual beast. Hitting the floor, the girl remained motionless for a few moments, then let out a long sigh and slowly stood up, lean muscles rolling under her bruised and lacerated skin. Even though she seemed tall for her age, she was still too small to reach up to Sunny's chest.
Curse these mad witches.
Suddenly full of fury, he glanced at the 3 ascended war maidens with a dark expression, then looked down at the abused child in front of him. Was this who he had to kill? Just a few moments ago, the task seemed so easy. The girl, meanwhile, finished picking herself from the floor and faced the war maidens with an insolent, contemptuous expression on her bruised face. With wild flames burning in her eyes, she spat a bit of blood on the floor and then bared her teeth in a feral grin.
What now, you old hags? More training? And here I was just starting to enjoy my daily punishment.
Despite the rude words and the recalcitrant tone, the girl's voice was soft and childishly high, and as a result, what she had meant to sound defiant ended up sounding like a childish tantrum or whine instead. Flustered by that, she gritted her teeth and then proceeded to make a rude gesture with her hand, as if to better articulate her point. Sunny's heart suddenly grew cold. He flinched slightly, his pupils widening in shock.
No.
He was already torn about the fact that he would have to kill a child, and this was going to be a battle to the death whether he wanted to or not. The War Maidens had made it abundantly clear. Showing mercy would be the same as admitting defeat, thus surrendering both his own life and that of Kai to their slaughter. But when the girl spoke, things took a turn from bad to worse. Because even if he had not recognized that tone, which he instantly did, Sonny was pretty sure that the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Hope were not in the habit of expressing their meaning with their middle fingers. That was a thing humans in the waking world did, which left only one possibility. The feral child in front of him was Effie.
God damn it.
Now, there was no chance at all that he would kill his opponent and follow the ritual set for them by the maidens. All that stuff about not having to fight the entire sect he had felt relieved about a few minutes ago, any possibility of that was basically gone. How were they going to get out of this one? He gritted his teeth, a low growl escaping through them. Hearing it, the senior War Maiden smiled coldly and then stared at Effie.
No training today, insolent child. Instead, a test. We have guests today, you see. Kill them, and I might order your older sister to feed you today. You have been demanding food, have you not?
At the mention of food, a somber expression appeared on the girl's bruised face. She hesitated for a moment, and then turned around, searching for these guests she was supposed to kill. Because of how the hall was lit, the figures of everyone who stood near the entrance and along the walls, the Saint, Kai, and dozens of War Maidens who were here to witness the challenge, appeared as dark silhouettes. The only one whom she could clearly see was Sonny. Effie stared at his abdomen for a few moments, confused. Then she slowly craned her neck, looking higher and higher, and then higher still. Her face gradually grew paler and paler, until a hint of fear appeared in her eyes.
Whoa. Hey there. Big guy.
She shivered, then glanced back at her teacher.
Are you joking? I am supposed to kill that monster?
The War Maiden shook her head.
Not a monster, a demon. Why? Are you not hungry?
Effie lingered for a few moments, then asked in a little voice.
Do I get any weapons at least?
The white-haired warrior chuckled cruelly.
Your fists should be enough. Use your tongue if they're not. It has been sharper than a blade lately.
The scrawny girl grimaced, then sighed and clenched her fist, turning to Sonny with hunger and resentment mixing in the bright eyes. Her soft voice resounded in the hall, full of reluctant determination.
All right then. Let's kill a demon. The things a girl must do to earn a dinner.
Sonny lowered his sword, staring at her with furious intent.
You idiot, it's me! Are you going to recognize me or not?
He thought. A weave of runes suddenly ignited on the stone floor of the hall, creating a circle around them. There was some sort of barrier preventing either from escaping now, and outsiders from offering help. The only ones left inside were Sonny, Effie, and the 3 War Maidens standing in front of the chalice. Sonny hissed, trying to get the child to look at him.
Crap, the Emerald Amulet. I better get it right now.
He released the hilt of the greatsword with one hand, intending to use it to fish out the amulet from the folds of his kimono.
If Effie doesn't recognize me, I'll have to really fight her until I come up with a plan. Luckily, she is just awakened. With my 3 cores and shadow augmentation, it should not be too...
Before he could finish the thought, however, the scrawny girl suddenly lunged forward with shocking speed and struck him in the abdomen with her tiny fist. The towering, four-armed demon folded like a piece of paper, spat a torrent of blood, and was thrown a dozen meters back like a weightless doll. Crashing into a stone pillar, he sent a net of cracks running through its gray surface and then rolled down to the floor. Stunned by the tremendous, ridiculous force of that single blow, Sonny tried to push air into his 4 empty lungs and stared at the little girl with dread.
Right. That is Effie, all right. Curses.
Because of Effie's easygoing personality and affable attitude, it was easy to forget just how fearsome of a warrior she actually was. Out of all the members of the cohort, she had survived on the Forgotten Shore the longest. She had done so while hunting down nightmare creatures on the cursed streets of the Dark City all alone as well. Mostly, though, that was because anyone willing to help her would have been disposed of by the ruler of the Bright Castle, who had been scorned by her rejection. The fact that the young huntress had never bowed to his demands despite the black mark placed on her only went to show how unyielding her will really was. Her aspect made Effie a perfect instrument of war. While not as drastic as the dire but narrow speed augmentation Castor had possessed, it was still wondrous. More importantly, it was an all-round enhancement. Speed, strength, agility, endurance, resilience, every facet of her physicality was elevated to an inhuman level. Sonny knew of her abilities better than most, since Effie had taught him how to wield a spear. However, due to the fact that their lessons had taken place in the real world, where the huntress was bound to a wheelchair, he never experienced her full strength in a fight himself. Until now.
Crap, that really hurt.
Before, Sonny had hoped that their strength would be more or less equal, considering that he was augmented by 3 shadows. However, it was not even close. That one blow almost shattered his body into pieces. That was only made more bizarre by the fact that it had been delivered by a scrawny child. Maybe if he had an additional shadow or 2. Sonny had become much more powerful, but Effie had grown much stronger after the Forgotten Shore as well. Her core was now fully saturated. More than that, while Sonny had been surviving in the Red Colosseum, she had survived a hell of her own, it seemed. Being tortured, taught, and tempered by the cult that had created Soulvein of all people. Sonny spat out blood, gritted his teeth, and slowly stood up.
This is not good,
he thought. He needed to get that god's damned amulet into his hand. The little girl glanced at him with surprise and tilted her head a little.
Huh? Still alive? Damn. Tough bastard.
He thought of taking out the emerald amulet once again, but Effie gave him no time. A split second later, she was already upon him, her leg flying through the air toward his ribcage. Sonny had no time to think about anything. He didn't want to hurt his friend, but he also didn't want to die. And getting hit by this bruised, wild, monstrous girl was going to kill him soon enough, no doubt.
I need to slow her down.
Even if his ribs survived Effie's wicked kick due to bone weave, the organs protected by them were not that resilient. The shock would surely rupture something important. Gritting his teeth, Sonny thrust one of his lower hands forward, putting the sharp blade of the dagger in the path of Effie's small, bony, and bruised leg. She was going to have to rethink that attack or risk having her calf cut wide open. Unless she was using her second aspect ability, of course.
Curse it all.
The dagger slid off of the girl's skin without leaving even a scratch on it, as though it was made out of tempered steel. Luckily, Sonny had expected this outcome and was already dodging out of the way. Effie's shin hit the pillar instead of his side, sending a rain of large stone chunks and sharp shards flying through the air. Before Sonny could regain his balance, the next attack came, and then the next, and the next, and the next. Unable to seriously hurt the girl, he had no choice but to retreat under the onslaught of deadly strikes, receiving several glancing blows that left him reeling and in pain. The scrawny girl was very small, but made up for it by being incredibly nimble and swift. The little imp was so wily and fast, in fact, that it almost felt as though she was in several places at the same time.
Stop running, big guy. Let us finish this quickly. I am hella hungry.
Would you slow down for a second, you devil child?
Sonny growled with unrestrained fury and brought the greatsword down, creating some space between himself and the advancing girl. He felt very, very frustrated. All he had to do, for now, was to let Effie know who he was. That was not very hard to do. There were many ways, really. He could use one of his shadows or summon a familiar memory, if only she gave him a damned moment to breathe and think. The problem was that Effie did not. She was also not fighting in any style Sonny was familiar with. He knew her usual technique pretty well, but this assault had nothing in common with it. Her current ferocious style was leagues beyond what the Huntress had been capable of in the past, both in terms of purpose and lethality. It was sort of breathtaking, even when performed by a scrawny child. A memory. A memory was the easiest option since summoning one took only a thought and several seconds. However, that was also the worst option, because doing so would reveal his ability to summon things out of thin air to the maidens. He and Kai had not gone through the trouble of appearing unarmed just to give that advantage away immediately.
Think, you fool.
There had to be a better way. Sonny deflected another devastating kick and took a step back, then froze for a split second and threw his buckler away. The thing was hideously bent by now anyway. With one of his hands now free, he made it into a fist, sent it flying forward, and extended his middle finger with a vicious snarl. Effie, who was already preparing to launch another attack, blinked a couple of times, then looked up at the towering demon with confusion.
Huh? Finally.
Using Effie's momentary confusion, Sonny lowered his hand and mimed grabbing the rim of a wheel and moving it forward and back as if pushing a wheelchair. The little girl frowned, then lunged forward and delivered a crushing strike, but this time, her movements were a bit slower, allowing him to easily dodge out of the way, purposefully so. Making sure that Effie could see his hand, he attacked with the greatsword while simultaneously making a fist again and pretending to have an arm wrestling match with an invisible opponent. The little girl swatted the sword away with her naked forearm, and then her blood-red eyes suddenly widened. She craned her neck and stared at the towering demon with an inexorable expression, then blurted out in a soft, childish voice,
Doofus?
Thank God. Took you long enough.
Sonny pretended to attack her with the dagger, then dodged a similarly half-hearted kick and gave the little girl a short nod. Effie's face trembled, and then she whispered,
Why? Why the spell? Are you so damn tall?